Yeah, it looks like it's raining there, is it? Rain. Is Andrew coming, Jonna? Is Andrew attending?
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can hear you now. I was just
Okay.
asking.
Yeah, I think our mics weren't on yet. Andrew is planning to attend via Zoom.
Oh, good. Oh, look. Not yet.
Usually get everyone free.
There's
Thanks for
Andrew.
giving me a reply.
Good evening.
Hey, good evening. Okay, well, we have a quorum. So Piper, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, we will call the Historic Architecture Review Commission meeting of May 17th at 5:30 p.m. to order at Rebecca Hall. Reminder of the purpose HARC to preserve, maintain, and enhance the historic character, scale, architectural integrity, and cultural resources of the town of Telluride and the Telluride Historic Landmark District. This is a hybrid meeting, and I don't see everybody's on electronically, so we probably don't need to give the phone number. And present from staff are Jonna, Piper, Erica, and Alex.
Allie's, yep.
Okay, Allie, and from town council, no one yet. And we'll go ahead and do the roll call. Stacy, go ahead and start around the table.
Stacy's here.
Matt Lee.
Bob's
Mark
here.
Campbell.
Christine Perpar.
Andrew
Okay.
Williamson.
Thank you and happy spring to everybody. Do we have a motion for the approval of the minutes from the March 15th regular HARC meeting?
Mark, I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Stacy, let's vote.
Stacy, yes.
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes.
Mark, yes. I'm the invisible guy. Mark, yes. Okay, it's
Chris, yes.
Chris, yes, it's unanimous. Okay. And
Mark, the next item should be the chair meeting minutes. Dated March 17th.
yeah, this is 2 days later. Yeah.
Yep.
So I will make a motion as the only attendee to approve the March 17th chair meeting minutes as written. Okay, and then the HARC P&Z Council Joint Retreat meeting minutes dated March 23rd. Do we have a motion to approve those?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Did we have a second? Okay, so Stacy, I guess we'll vote.
Someone second?
We need someone to second.
We didn't
No
have
one was at the town council retreat? Yes, you were.
I was.
Retreat. I thought this was.
In March. You, I think you were all there.
Stacy wasn't.
I was not there.
Stacy wasn't there, so that's okay.
The other one.
Yeah.
That was-
So will someone second it?
I did.
Okay,
Second.
thank you.
Okay, and we'll vote. Go ahead.
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes.
Chris, yes.
Mark, yes.
Andrew, do
Okay.
you
Andrew, yes.
Good. It's unanimous. Thank you much. Staff announcements, Jonna.
Sure. Thank you. Just a reminder to everyone that May is National Historic Preservation Month. Last week at town council, they made a proclamation and acknowledging that the month of May is Preservation Month. Typically, we don't do a lot in May because it's still off season. But I did want to mention that this is the year for the Preservation Awards. We do them every other year in odd numbered years, and so this is the year. We'll be announcing that to the public and try to bring you the nominees at the June HARC meeting for you to look at. If that sounds good. And then also, I just wanted to announce that Piper's birthday is this Friday, and we just wish her a very happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I have the public process slide available, Mark, if you want to go over that.
Sure. Thank you. Hey, I had one question. Is the write-up finished? And maybe I missed out because I've been going from that R&R to P and Z on the first two items. that did?
Yes, the minutes we received after the packet was published, so they'll be in the June packet.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, just to remind everybody listening about the process, the steps are that the HARC chair will introduce the project. Staff will give the presentation and answer HARC's questions. The applicant will then give a presentation and answer HARC questions. We ask for it to be 30 minutes or less. The public will then be invited to make comments on that specific project, and we ask for 3 minutes or less per person to give everybody a chance to talk. It looks like not a big crowd tonight, but dialogue between the public, applicants, and the HARC members is not permitted. The applicant may address any comments then made by the public. Public comment ends, and the applicant may rebut any comments made by the public, which we had that. And then 8 is the final step is the HARC members will deliberate and then vote. So thank you for following the process. And any public comment on non-agenda items before we get to the public hearing items, non-agenda items. I don't see a hand up, Piper, unless you do.
I don't.
And therefore we will move right along, and I need to recuse myself from the first item, which I understand Bob's going to chair, so I will sign off and then rejoin.
Well, I had to recuse myself also for conflict of interest.
Okay, mine's proximity. Okay,
So we will have 4 members acting on this application, and although Bob chaired this item when it came to us in January, Ally has asked that you re-elect him temporary chair for this item again tonight. So if you want to do that.
Do I need to make a motion for that?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to elect Bob temporary chair for this agenda item. I'll second that.
And then
Okay.
vote.
Matt, yes.
Chris, yes.
Andrew, yes. All right, Bob, you're a chair.
All right. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
I'll try to do my best.
Okay, so Bob, you can read the introduction.
Right. This is for the bench.
Yes.
Great. All right. Project title, bench continued from January 18th, 2023 HARC meeting. Summary, consideration of an application for a small scale addition in the historical residential zone district, which will contain less than 2,500 square feet of floor area per LUC 7-203.A.1.B.3, and B, a small scale repositioning of a rated THAS primary structure per 7-203A3B4. Legal description, parcel B, Goldsworthy Minor Subdivision, Town of Telluride, according to the plat recorded in Plat Book 1 at page 835, County of San Miguel, State of Colorado. Address is 115 West Galena Avenue. Zone district is historic residential. The owner, the No Quarter Trust. Applicant Chris Hawkins, Alpine Planning LLC and Tommy Hine Architects. Staff member is Jonna Wenzel, Historic Preservation Director. And we'll start with Jonna.
Thank you. Before I get started, we received public comment from Mark Shambaugh, the neighbor, earlier today. Did you all have a chance to read his comment?
Yes.
Great. So it's been a while since we've reviewed this project, so I will run through and orient to the site, which is located on the north side of West Galena between Pine and First Streets. The existing structure is supporting, and it was built around 1898. The house still retains a high degree of historic integrity despite several small additions that were built after the period of significance. There are several rated structures in the vicinity, and there's a local landmark across the street to the south. The Sanborn maps show the footprint of the house has not changed much during the period of significance. There was a small stoop at the southwest corner that was enclosed between 1904 and 1908, which was during the period of significance. One of the conditions previously was to keep that enclosed, which I'll show you here in a second. Later additions have been added to the house on the north side. This large shed roof, a portion of it was added later after the period of significance, as well as the north side dormers. Some alterations were as late as the 1980s. This project proposes to reposition the historic house to the east 3 feet, to the south 3 feet 2 inches, and to raise it 1.5 feet, which has been lessened from 3 feet, which was proposed at the previous hearing. It also proposes alterations to the supporting structure, removal of those non-historic additions I just mentioned, construction of a 556 square foot garage, actually, which is detached now, and construction of a new 1,795 square foot basement. In January, HARC continued the project with 24 conditions. The applicants have complied with most of the conditions, but staff finds that there are still 9 of those conditions that haven't been addressed in the revisions, and so have been retained in the proposed motion, and I'll go over each of these to explain. So the previous condition number 1, which was to eliminate or significantly reduce the repositioning to the south. As I've discussed in the memo, repositioning is supported by the design guidelines when necessary for the preservation of a structure. The repositioning to the east 3 feet, for example, is supported because the house is sitting over the west property line and is encroaching into the alley. So in this case, staff supports the repositioning to the east. However, repositioning to the south appears to be necessary only to provide greater separation between the house and the new garage. So without moving the house, it seems there would be 7 feet of separation between the two. The minimum that can be approved by HARC is 6 feet. So it seems that the repositioning could be eliminated or at least reduced. So staff has retained this condition as new condition number 1. Previous condition number 5 was to retain the historic window openings and historic windows unless historic framing provides evidence of larger openings. And I'll talk simultaneously about previous condition number 8, which was to preserve the historic window sizes on the south facade unless historic framing provides evidence of larger window openings. So there is a historic window in the gable on the south facade, which is still proposed to be enlarged and is not consistent with RE number 9 regarding windows or RE number 19 regarding new alterations and additions. So this condition is retained, well, actually, these conditions are retained as new conditions number 2 and 3 in the proposed motion. Previous condition number 11 was to remove the skylights from the historic west shed roof. As you can see on the illustration in new plans, the skylights have not been removed from the historic west shed roof, where they are highly visible and are inconsistent with the RE standards number 9C and HR number 25F1. So this condition has been retained as new condition number 4 in the proposed motion. Previous condition number 15 is any historic siding shall be preserved or replaced in kind. Right now, on the revised plans, rusty corrugated metal is proposed for the historic west shed addition. I don't know if the original siding still exists under the newer lap siding, but it's unlikely that it was metal originally. And as this is an addition to the house rather than accessory structure where metal might have been used for siding, this condition is retained as new condition number 5 to replace, preserve or replace in kind any historic siding. So that brings us to previous condition number 17, which was to provide a landscape plan and planting schedule. A landscape plan was provided in the plan set, but we still need a planting schedule. So that has become new condition number 6. Previous condition number 19 was regarding the trees, and any additional trees to be removed not shown on the plans will be subject to a tree removal permit. That's pretty standard and is listed as new condition number 7. Previous condition number 20 was to reduce the height of the concrete wall along the alley to no more than 30 inches in height. On the revised plans, there's a portion of the wall along the alley at the front yard that is about 5 feet tall, which is inconsistent with the HR standards number 15C2. So this condition has been retained as new condition number 8. And the last one is previous condition number 24, which was to provide a complete rehabilitation plan consistent with the rehabilitation standards. In the revised plan set, some notes have been added to the elevations, but a rehabilitation plan describes how existing historic and non-historic materials will be treated. This is a pretty standard requirement for projects involving historic structures. So this has been retained as new condition number 9 in the proposed motion. So staff finds that that a lot of alterations or revisions have been made since the previous review. And staff finds that with these conditions that the application could be approved this evening. But I'm happy to answer any questions. And the applicants will be joining us via Zoom.
Anybody have any questions? I do. I have one. On number 3, the historic window sides on the south facade. From what I'm seeing here, it's only the window that's in the upper gable.
Yeah, it says
That's that one.
the
Yeah,
one
okay.
in the red box is the only one. There's a note that says that it is intended to be enlarged.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, great. Just want to make sure because it says preserve the historic window sizes. Just
In general, that's a preservation standard.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
anybody else have a question for John?
Do not.
Okay. Who's representing the applicant?
Hi, Chris Hawkins with Alpine Planning. How is everyone tonight? Thank you for hearing us this evening. And thanks for John's presentation. We just have a short, thank you. We just have a short presentation. So John went through the repositionings that we're asking for, and we do want to talk a little bit about the 3'2" repositioning. The proposed biggest change in this design was that the garage, in the prior plans, we had an addition that was to the house with connector and home attached to it. Staff really wanted to see just a detached accessory garage with the plans and to remove the, building attachment, the building addition. That was been the biggest change since the last plan that we saw back in 2022. And that was really an effort to address staff's concern and try to move this home in a better direction per the design guidelines. When that occurred, though, other things are coming into play because the lot's only a 75-foot deep lot. It's not a typical 117.5 feet deep lot like you get in the rest of the town. You have a historic setback in the front of 18.7 feet, and the house is about 32 feet deep. And then you have a rear setback of 5 feet, and that leaves only 19.8 feet for an accessory building. So we understand that's what we have to work with. But within that too, we have to provide a yard between the primary building and the home. And so when you look at that overall, we basically have 10'3" between the home and the accessory building when 15 feet is desired. And it's really a small garage. It's really 12 feet 8 inches by less than 20 feet. And that footprint's needed to get boys in the garage too. Bikes, cars, open up doors, have a functional garage. So the main reason we're asking for this repositioning is to address the main concern of on this small lot. How do you do a sensitive redevelopment of this property and preserve the original building and get the desired yard in between? And so those were the main push-pull factors that we were looking at. And if you say it needs to go back to 3 feet, it's going to change that yard quite a bit. It would basically become about a 7-foot yard. It eliminated landscape planting in the backyard, and then there'd be some other smaller changes. We just think it really is a good repositioning to help accomplish the desired redevelopment on this site. When you look at the before and after plans on this, I think you're going to just see some, the dramatic moves here that were made. This outline is the height of the house that was an addition behind the front view. And then this is basically looking at it from the west elevation. Again, looking at this is what was proposed. It was a full-on addition connector. And now what we have proposed is a detached accessory garage. And so definitely insubordinate. And I did want to touch on that a little bit per Mark's email. When you're dealing with a detached building, and this is, I believe, considered a detached building because it's just an accessory garage. And I think John could clarify that. I'm not sure the rehabilitation standards apply when you're dealing with a detached garage like this. I realize there's a below grade tunnel attachment, but town staff has been allowing those for detached buildings that are not being evaluated per the RE standards for 2 or 3 projects we've been involved with. 226 North Pine, 336 as well, North Oak. And now we're proposing a similar treatment here overall. But again, a big change between those two things. Again, this is looking at the original east elevation. Again, you have the connector and the taller building, and then now you have a completely detached garage. And this is a small mudroom on the back right here. These are not attached at all on the side. Site plan view of this shows the yard we're trying to get in between here at 10 feet 3 inches. And if it's reduced down, this will basically go to, to be, in essence, 3 feet less. So 7 feet in between here overall. So you're going to have a very narrow backyard in here and a very narrow connector between the stairs and planters, etc. We have no problems with conditions 2 through 7. Those are great and we understand them. I did want to talk about the height of the wall along the alley. It's really not a retaining wall because it's not holding earth. It's more of I don't want to call it a fence, but it's a fence / wall hybrid. And it was really put in there to, one, reduce down the current wall, which is huge. It's way too thick, way too long, and it looks bad, and replace it with an appropriate board form finished, more above grade wall that's used to avoid snow from being plowed into that area, to prevent water from draining into the alley. And it's also meant to protect that area from cars backing from the property that's to the west. So, when you look at it from a side view, you can clearly see it's not retaining earth here. And this is the part of the wall where it's above grade and it acts more like a fence. Understand there are design guidelines for fences. And in this situation, we are asking for a masonry fence, which is allowed by the definition of the land use code. But in this instance, we'd like something more solid and structural for the reasons I already mentioned. And with that, Tommy, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you did a good job. The only thing I wanted to add about the repositioning, I think, is when you look at this house in relation to Mark Shambaugh's, and Mark, I love you. If you look at the streetscape, and if you look at the context site plan, I don't know if we have that, Chris. If you look at the streetscape, how dwarfed this house is relative to Mark's and the other neighbors, obviously.
Back here,
If you look at the site plan, the relationship to the neighbors, we're still, slightly behind Mark Shambaugh's main facade, then his bay window comes out. We still have a significant yard space, and there's really an awkward relationship to the drive-in across the alley, the corner drive-in across the alley to the neighbors. So, creating privacy for the outdoor space here with that wall, like Chris said, we're kind of it's an homage to the wall that's there, but it's really for privacy and safety from the cars. And I don't think anything we're doing here is detrimental whatsoever to the rating. This is a supporting structure. I think we've acquiesced and come back with a significantly more modest, respectful approach. And I'd like your guys' support on the repositioning.
Okay, anything else?
Nope, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
For the applicant.
I have a question, and this relates to Mark's comment about the garage. I was trying to do some quick scaling measurements. I don't have a section here, but overall, it appears to me this garage with the space above it, can't remember if that was a office or whatnot, but seems very small scaled. Looks like you've got probably 8 foot floor to ceiling in the garage. You've got probably 5, 6 to the plate upstairs, and a very steep driveway.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Am I kind of judging this?
No, that's correct. We've really done everything we can to minimize the scale of this structure and to keep the driveway reasonable. I think it's also a consideration that the grade is rising behind the historic house. So in many ways, we've done a very commendable job keeping this secondary structure concept alive.
Tommy, can you tell us the height of the top of the gable or the shed, the new building, and the highest ridge line for the house? What's the difference?
Sure. Let's see, Chris, could you go to the roof plan? Do we have the roof plan?
Yeah, let me reshare this again.
And I might have to defer to one of my guys, Bob. Devin, do you have that info that Bob's asking for on the ridge heights, or is it?
Yeah, there's no roof ridge here, but trying to.
Maybe on the elevation, Chris, on the alley elevation.
I didn't see anything. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I think we can get this information here. Let me look. So let me zoom in on this one.
Devin, are you muted, or can someone unmute Devin potentially for me?
It's right, it's on A 1.3.
Okay.
We have ridge heights.
Oh.
Yep, for both structures.
1.3. Sorry.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, hold on, I'll pull up those dimensions, just give me a sec.
I
Look like we
apologize if I
have 'em.
missed it. 34.
So Matt, what was your concern? Sorry.
I'm just trying to, processing Mark's comment about lowering it. It looks like this garage and the living space above it is about as small as it can practically be to be a garage. The driveway already seems very steep.
I agree.
And I'm getting a little bit deliberations, but this is already a very small scale house and
Yeah, so
the
it's,
grade rises up. So I'm having a hard time seeing how they could reduce the size of this garage.
So this
and
is-
still have the living space.
Yeah,
above.
I see it now. Thank you.
8.3341 1 1/8 to 8.339 1/4.
So about 4 inches.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the important part is that, you really don't see the secondary from the street, from Galena. The primary blocks it out.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Do we have any public comment other than Mark's letter?
Will you ask people to raise their hands electronically if they're on?
Raise your hand electronically if you want to make a comment.
I see none.
Seeing none, we will move on to the park review. Anybody want to start?
I'll start. I think staff has nailed the conditions here. I don't have any new ones to add, nor do I contest any of them. I think the primary thing to talk about is the amount of reduction of their requested 3-foot 2-inch or 3-foot 3-inch move to the south. I just on what we discussed and just found out about the garage and secondary unit, doesn't seem like that can be made much smaller or lowered. That's my brief comments.
Okay.
Just to clarify what you said. You meant the distance between the structure?
Yeah, their request to move the historic house
House forward.
Right,
Three-
we're moving it. To
3
the
feet,
east,
2 inches
which-
to the
No.
south.
Well, we are moving it.
Yes.
It's been approved to, well, yes. And then we're moving it forward 3.
Point
2
2 inches.
3.2. My only comment is if there's a way to reduce it and reduce the planner back there and still give them a yard, but I do think I have less of an issue of the 3'2" moving forward because we are still back and behind the neighboring property, as you can see on A 1.0. So that would, if. I don't know, I think I have a big problem with the 10-foot between the structures.
Okay.
Um,
Andy?
Andrew?
Andrew, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm
Comments, sorry.
scrolling through it real quick. All my stuff is digital. I'm just trying to pull it up for myself. So, Johnny, can you remind me again with this repositioning, the 3 feet 2 inches, what the setback from the front would be again? I know it's on here. I just off the top of my head trying to find it.
15.6.
So it'd be 15.6. It's Bob, what are your thoughts?
I was torn when I first was looking at this, but I see if the building moved, if we move the building back the edge of the garage would be butting up against the vestibule in the back, just about. It's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
And there would be no space in between. I kind of agree with Chris that it is setting back further than the house next door. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a really significant problem.
And I think to point out, if you look at A2.1 at the roof plan where Bob was just concerned about those roofs getting so tight, but I also think with this being a north yard area, it's gonna be a disaster. The smaller and the smaller it gets.
It's going to be a snow shed.
Yeah, and
Storage.
so, I think I'm okay with the shift to the south.
I can support what you guys are saying.
Any other issues with the proposed motion?
I do agree with staff that we need to reduce that concrete wall.
I agree with all of
Yep.
that staff's other
Mhm.
conditions.
So our motion would be to retain 2 through 9 and eliminate number 1. So anybody have any more comments?
I'm wondering if we should just change number 1 to say, not that I don't know if it'll do anything, but consider reducing the repositioning for number 1. If there is a way they can accommodate some of it,
I think we either tell them to do it or
Okay.
not.
Sure. Okay,
Would you agree?
Yeah.
Chair.
should we need want to make a motion if we're ready?
yeah, I can make the motion. Just a second. I move to approve the final small scale addition and small scale repositioning of the supporting structure. The HAS 5SM.1759 and the new construction of an accessory structure at 115 West Galena Avenue, parcel B, block 25, town of Telluride, based on the staff memo dated May 17th, 2023, and with the following conditions. Strike number 1, 2 through 9 as stated. This motion is based on evidence and testimony provided at a public hearing held on May 17th, 2023, with notice of such hearing provided as required by the Telluride Land Use Code. Revised plans incorporating the conditions of approval shall be submitted within 60 days of this approval, or this approval becomes null and void unless otherwise indicated. The revised drawing submitted for certificate of appropriateness must be a complete set with any changes to the drawings clouded and labeled. Any changes to the drawings beyond the conditions of approval may result in more than one submittal being required.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second.
Okay,
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes,
Chris, yes.
Andrew, yes.
motion passes.
Thanks to Tommy and Chris and the gang for
Thank
doing all
you.
those changes and complying.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you guys. And I wanted to say thanks to Chris for being there. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. And when staff says a work session is needed, we'll do a work session.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I don't want to go that far. Donna,
On time.
Donna, thank you. Thank you, guys. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody's back. Good job. Thank you, guys. All right. The second public hearing item is 536 West Columbia, continuation from December 14th and March 15th HARC meetings. It's consideration of a small scale new construction in the HR zone district that will contain 950 square foot or more of floor area, but not more than 2,500 square foot of floor area per land use code 7203A1B1. And a small scale demolition of a non-rated THS primary structure within the THLD per land use code 7203A3B6A. And a small scale demolition of a non-rated THS secondary structure within the Telluride Landmark District per land use code 7203A3B6B. And finally, the minor scale new construction in the historic residential zone that will contain less than 950 square foot floor area per land use code 7203A1C1. Legal descriptions, block 9, lot 31. It's at 536 West Columbia in the historic residential zone district. Owner is 536 West Columbia LLC. Applicant Alpine Planning and Salt Architecture. Staff member Erica Jensen. Erica.
Great, thank you.
Can I interrupt you, Erica, real quick?
Yes, of course.
I need to recuse myself from this. I am business partners with the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, all right. This is the final small scale review at 536 West Columbia. This project was first seen in December 2022, where it was continued to March, where it was continued without discussion to May. So it's been a while since you guys have seen this one. It is located in the historic residential zone district in the historic residential treatment area and is located inside the historic district. The house and shed are both non-contributing without qualifications. Previously, the applicant was proposing to keep about 300 square feet of the front gable form of the primary structure. Now the project is proposing complete demolition of the primary and secondary structures and new construction of a primary and secondary structure. And these are the standards for demolition, which staff finds have been met. The first condition was to increase the front setback to at least 15 feet. It has now been increased to about 17 feet. And this was the biggest issue with the previous proposal, and they have significantly increased the setback. Condition 2 was to provide greater stepping down to the alley. A shed roof was added on the alley structure, but the main house is still one vertical wall plane with decks, and there's no change in the wall plane on either structure. This condition has been retained. It is a discussion about if decks provide stepping down or not. You guys can discuss that. Condition 3 was to provide greater stepping down to the street. With the larger front setback, the mass and scale does appear smaller from the street, and this condition has been met. Condition 4 was to more clearly define the front entry. It is better defined with a central path to the front porch and centralized front stairs. Condition 5 was to increase the open space between the primary and secondary structure. It was increased about 2.5 feet. There's still not much open space, but because the front setback was increased so significantly, it seems appropriate that there is not as much open space in the back. Condition 6 was to revise the north-south gables to be of the same pitch. They are all 9/12 now. And condition 7 was to inset the south edge at the second level southeast deck. The deck now connects across the entire facade. The intent of this condition was not achieved, and it has been reworded to make it clearer. Condition 8 was to move the trash enclosure next to the garage to minimize its visual impacts. It is now located on the east side of the garage. Condition 9 was to reduce the number of doors on the south elevation. The number of doors did not decrease, but increased. The 4-pack on the first level was reduced slightly in size, but another 2-pack of doors was added. So this condition has been retained. Condition 11 was to reduce the size of the deck on the secondary structure. The deck on the south side of the secondary structure was removed. There was a typo in the memo. It talked about the primary structure, but it was removed on the secondary structure, and this condition has been met. Condition 12 was to reduce the size of the 4-pack of doors on the secondary structure, and they were reduced to a 3-pack. Condition 10 was to revise the front deck posts as to not mimic historic details. They were revised to a more contemporary design.
Condition 13 was to revise the landscape plan to be of a more traditional residential characters with trees, flowers, and shrubs. The landscape plan has been revised to include multi-stem aspen and plantings. And condition 14 was to install sill guard brakes or other devices to prevent snow shedding and ice shedding onto adjacent properties on both the primary and secondary structures. Snow guards were added, but are still needed on the west side of the roof on both the primary and secondary structure and the east side of the roof on the primary structure to prevent snow shedding onto adjacent properties. 1 through 4 are conditions that have been retained or revised. The only new condition is condition 5, which is to revise the trash enclosure to be open on 2 sides to ensure that per the land use code, it is not enclosed space. It is only open on 1 side, so it just needs to be open on 2 sides. And I'm happy to answer any questions before we hear from the applicant who's here in person with us.
I have a
Yeah.
question, Erica. On number 3, reduce the number of doors on the south elevation. It's like there have been some windows added. So I'm curious, in your opinion, if this condition is really about the glazing or the number of doors. And I'm wondering if we sort of broaden it to allow them to reduce the number of doors or reduce the overall glazing for that elevation.
Yeah, I think that condition. That condition does specifically refer to doors. Maintain the traditional pattern of doors along streets and alleys. I think there are too many doors for the size of the house on the alley elevation, but I think that could be a discussion about if it is about the number of doors or more about the amount of glazing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Very good. Well, let's hear from the applicant.
Great. So Dylan Henderson and Chris, you're here.
Yep. Dylan, do you want me to share my screen in the presentation or do you want to?
You can go ahead and do it. I could always share after you've completed it if I want to jump into the architecture. It's up to you.
Sure. So Chris Hawkins, Alpine Planning. Eric has already ran through some of these, so I'm just going to touch on it. Again, a dramatic increase in the front setback between the original and revised. The stepping down to the alley, I think it'd be good to have a discussion about this because this building, are you looking at that just on a building by building basis? Or are you looking at it across both building forms together? Because we already have a stepping coming down off the roof to this lower level. It looks like, is that about a foot, Dylan?
Yeah, and I actually have the model up, so I was going to share that. Just
okay, so I'll let you talk more about that. But then you step down to decks, and then you've got the alley structure further stepping down with the deck on the east side, and then a little shed kicker roof. So we really feel we meet that requirement, and if not, it'd be good to get direction about what sort of stepping are you really looking for. So condition 3, 4, and 10 are kind of, 4 and 10 are very related. More stepping down to the streetscape on the front. The bay window was now replaced with a shed roof form on the front. So we have stepping on this kind of first westernmost wing. And then when you're looking at it from the front, between the original and revised plans, there's even more stepping now with a front porch element down to railing, stairs leading to sidewalks. So we feel that addition is well met. And this is also illustrating the revised front door with a more traditional centered front door, 2 windows on the side, and the simpler railings to not confuse history. So we think all of those conditions have been met. Reducing the size of the deck was reduced down a couple feet. It went from a 7-foot setback to a 5-foot setback in between. Condition 6, the north-south gables, those have been revised to match. condition 7, in insetting it was here, and we understand now that Erica would like to see it inset here with this deck and this deck here. I'm not sure. Dylan may have additional comments on that. Trash enclosures has been moved. Condition 9, reducing the number of doors. I'll let Dylan comment on that. There's a little bit of functionality there because if you have 2 decks, here you're going to need a deck entry here. And then there's, I'm sure, a little bit of functionality at play with the floor plans as well. Reducing the size of the deck on the secondary structure. Eric already talked about this one, but it shows the big change. And then revising the landscape plan, there's now a planter bed and a tree in the front yard and revegetation on the rest of it. And then 14 is pretty straightforward and understand that needs to carry on. So Dylan, I will stop sharing my screen and let you talk.
Right, so I was going to share here my Revit model. So, okay, cool. So I just wanted to talk about the decks and then the stepping, because I think those are the two. Obviously, significant change to the overall design of this home. Originally at the front entry, we were keeping the existing front of house, and we were also keeping the front of pathway. And I just wanted to point out that the client, Ben Jackson in this case, he was really pretty adamant about keeping that historic proportion of the front of the house as it faces the street, which in this iteration we kept as well. And so I was really happy about that and keeping that sort of narrow profile facing the street. So I think that's great. Centered up this front entry as the staff had pointed out as a condition of approval, and as Chris had pointed out to you. So when we get to the back of the house, totally understand the comment of number of doors. I have these decks. There's not much yard space because of the accessory garage unit and then the parking at the rear of the house. There's really no functional yard space. So these decks become the yard for this house, and they have great views of the ski area, et cetera. And so I've got decks coming off a bedroom and decks coming off a bedroom on the second, on this level, sorry, on the first level. So coming off master and coming off guest. And then when you get up to the upper level, I have a small double door coming off of the kitchen with 2 windows flanking that, and then a 4 pocketing sort of slider. So center opening slider with 4-panel door. And so I understand the comment. I just think from a functional standpoint, I'm trying to give some livable area to this kitchen living dining level, which is on the upper level. And then on the first level, trying to get just functional access out of these bedrooms out onto a deck for a morning coffee, for instance. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. The other thing relative to this, to the stepping toward the alley. So currently, I'm going to show you a section through this part of the house, because I currently have these windows set at 6'8", so that's 80 inches. I've got 10 3/8 available above that for a header. So functionally, if we did that in steel, I suppose I could get a 6-inch header to work, but typically we like to leave 10 to 12 inches because structure wants to put an LVL in there as opposed to steel. So I could squeeze a few inches out if we went to steel headers. And then I drive my plate height off of that. When I show you this west elevation, I'm already maxed out on this upper level roof, so I can't raise that roof to increase this step. I do step this down toward the alley and then step down to deck and then step down to this and then step down to shed. So I do feel like that we functionally accomplished the stepping toward toward the alley. And I would hate to start to put this dining area up into a gable where I have to solve it all with dormers to create headspace. So I think I could get something out of this, but I would hate to be pushed down so far that I start to really cramp how you're living in the space. And so those were the big things I wanted to talk about, just as this functional deck space facing the south elevation of this house, the access onto these decks from the 2 bedrooms on the first level, and then living and kitchen upstairs, and then the stepping down, which I do feel like we've accomplished. So the other conditions I think are straightforward, and I can work with Erica to get that worked out. But I'm hoping we can get a little leniency on the stepping aspect, just based on what I feel like we've done our best to accomplish on this. And I can answer any dimensional questions because again, I've got this model open here. So.
Hey Dylan, what's the height of that shed roof or on the garage roof versus the house after you've stepped down the house?
So you want the distance from here to here, Mark?
No, the height of those two ridges, yeah.
So average height or overall? Because
Well, the
average.
average, yeah, that average height right there versus on the garage
okay.
ridge line.
That to you. The bottom of Eve. This is rough, so don't hang me on that. I'm going fast here. So you want this to rear grade elevation at garage, or where do you want it pulled to? Mark?
The top of the garage ridge.
Oh, I see.
Go from the top to the top.
Yeah, just going looking for the delta. It steps down about 7 feet.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's 10'4" and 15/16 difference.
10 foot. Okay.
Top of ridge to top of ridge.
Okay. Thank you.
And then average to average, it steps down 9'7" at 15/16.
Mm-hmm. And that garage is how much above elevation? The top of the ridge line is above the alley.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at my max of my 16-foot average now. So
Okay.
yeah, so because of the way this slopes toward the rear of the wall. Mhm.
And you'd have maybe 6 inches is about it to bring it down. If we didn't have a change in wall plane, you could bring it down 6 inches or whatever. What are you thinking?
Like that garage roof, just bring it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me answer that here. So hold on a sec. I can answer that question. Just have to get this bar out of my way. So I'm pausing because I need to just pull a section through this to tell you what that plate height is, because I'm already up in the dormer there. And so I just want to make sure that I'm not answering this inappropriately. That was not what I wanted. You're testing my computer. This is unbelievable. Okay, hold on.
Take your time.
Yeah. So this is what that sort of roof profile looks like. So that's at the dormer, and then down here at the gable where it connects, I have a plate height of about 5'6". So I've got dormers, so you make it livable, and then the plate on this gable as it goes north-south on the building is a plate height of 5'6". So I could get it down to 5'0". I'd hate to be much lower than that.
Okay, thank you.
Dylan, do you mind panning out a little bit? The neighbor to the west of you, that structure, how far does that plane out with the alley?
Here, let me do this. This is going to be easier to look at it this way. So I think this is what you're asking about, right?
Yes.
So that's the structure next to us. So are you asking how it planes relative to the south?
This is good. I think this is
Okay.
really telling. That's a pretty
Yeah.
sized structure into the alley.
Yeah, and then I have a fairly large structure on my east side as well that I can unhide for you. Then you wouldn't be able to see the model though. So.
That helps.
I'd unhide it and spin it around. It might help. your
Okay.
cause.
Yeah, happy to here.
Oh,
And again, this is a massing model, so grain of salt on this, but this is kind of what we have going on with our neighboring structures.
mm.
Thanks for doing that.
That was impressive.
Did you see that?
I see.
Yeah. Hands are steady.
Any other questions for Dylan? Any questions before we lose him about the doors versus glass mat on that south elevation? Or is that, you just want to wait to deliberate?
I think that's just a deliberation. It seems to me it's a lot of that, of those doors are going to be sort of hidden by the garage structure. And I would say it's maybe more of a glazing question than doors, but I want to hear what the rest of the board says.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll hear from the public. Any public comment? Please raise your hand electronically to comment. Going once. Twice. Okay, we'll move to deliberations. Please comment on first on Erica's 5 conditions and then any other additional conditions or adjustments to those you suggest, and we'll discuss it, whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. I'm not sure if, I think number 1 needs to be addressed. I think this view on screen is kind of telling that this is similar to the project we just reviewed. Tommy's project is a pretty small garage and space above it, pretty modest height, 5.5 foot plates with some sizable structures flanking this property. So I would strike number 1 or just suggest that we make it a suggestion. And then number 3, I would change that statement to say reduce the number of doors and or glazing on the south elevation. And then I agree with the rest of the conditions.
Okay, others?
I agree with Matt on 1. I don't think we need it. I'm curious about the breaking up the upper deck. There's a connection between the two. It's a small connection between the 2 decks, and I'm not sure. Doesn't feel to me like that's a big issue.
Would you be fine if just the size of those decks were reduced on the east and west side and still allowed the connector? So it doesn't
Push them
seem
from the sides.
from the sides. We seem to have done that a lot in the HR over the last.
Yeah, I think that would be good. It is pushed in from on the, I guess that would be the west side.
Yeah, it is. So if
And do the same thing
if
on
the
the
east side
east
was
side.
moved in, that would still allow the functionality of that to walk through the spaces.
Yeah. I think given that they're not that big a decks and it's the living space, outdoor dining, hanging out kind of thing, I think having connected doesn't bother me.
Although I'm just noticing it stacks on the eastern side. It'd be a bit awkward to put a little roof there on the lower
Oh,
level.
the part below sticks out below it.
Chris, Andrew?
Sorry, I'm just getting clarification.
Here. This comes out to. So this is in line, C's in line.
Oh, I
So
got
the
you.
deck, there's space below that deck. And so. You'd have to push. Everything in a bit to make that not go on the edge.
I don't know. I
Chris.
think the decks are set back and I
Chris.
don't really.
Can you move the microphone closer?
You want to hear me?
Yeah.
When you
we
sit
do.
back,
Oh.
far away.
I'm just sorry, I'm working with the poll.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're far enough set back. But I don't have any issues with the decks. I think it's gonna be beautiful space. The stepping down to the alley, I guess I misread that and thought we were talking even more on the secondary structure. And we had previously talked, and sorry to bring this up, that we weren't just gonna let these little shed roofs suffice as our step backs to the alley. And so that's where I took that comment too. I think we talked about that as a crew, as a group.
The small one that's over the garage
yeah.
door. Yeah.
Anyway, so maybe that's just up for discussion. I don't really have a problem with the shed roof. I think to the pedestrian walking through that alley, it'll be step down and stepping the upper portion back, just as an architect makes for really bad detail, but we did discuss that for some time. And I think it was on a commercial building. I just want to bring that up again and really for no other reason than to be consistent. I don't have an issue with this shed roof, but you know, stepping that upper level back will cause a larger roof there, right? So we'll have to cover the garage. Anyway, so I wanted to discuss that and then I agree with staff on reducing placing in the doors on the south elevation for this time.
I think a lot of times when we've had discussions about that stepping down and what constitutes a step down, it's been with 3-story facades. I think the context here is the overall stepping down of the project to the
Yeah,
alley,
and I think
which
I
is
might
why,
write
I
that
mean,
down.
and to me, the rear facade of the house is so far removed, so far back from the alley. And as Dylan showed, from ridge to ridge to ridge to deck to ridge to, I mean, there's a lot of stepping there, actually, I think. So I'm fine with it too. I'm fine with striking one too also.
How about-
Andrew, any other comments, or Stacy or Andrew, who haven't spoken?
Well, this is another example of having something 3-dimensional look at is helpful. You do open up a can of worms, right? Having us do on the fly stuff, but seeing this bird's eye view here, would have been much more in favor of either or both removing the connection between the two decks or pushing in that corner. But now that I see that there are, connections to the space below and that those decks really do a good job of handling that cleanly without a bunch of little cut up roofs. I've changed my mind. Seeing that,
I did too.
Yeah.
I was thinking they should have been 2 separate decks and I think they're fine.
so. And again, we're talking about decks that are substantially set back from the alley.
How about number 3?
I don't have. It didn't jump out at me. Which is that the glazing of the doors
Yeah.
or the question? I think the reduction in number. So previously there were 3. A reduction would have meant you had 2.
The doors have been added.
Right, I understand, but I think they've been added in reasonable locations. I think for me, what might be over the top is that on the left side, they're both 4-panel. They could be 3, but they're behind the garage, so they're not as visible. Now, if we wanted to make that about glazing area, then it really went up, right? Because there was a door added in 3 windows.
There was some, I think overall it went up, but there were some door sizes that were reduced. To me, it's more about glazing. I'm not so concerned about the number of doors, given that the western side is relatively obscured by the garage. It seems that some reduction of glazing would be appropriate, though.
The biggest set of doors is the master bedroom on that first level, bigger than what's in the dining room. Wonder if that could be reduced to the same size as the dining room. And that would significantly reduce the amount of glazing there.
Dylan, well, I can ask Dylan. I'm wondering what it would look like if the doors were copied from above to below. I understand that lower is wider on the left, on the right side. That in elevation, that might look awkward. I don't know how awkward that would look functionally.
are you guys okay with not being that prescriptive and just saying that either they reduce the amount of glazing or they reduce or reduce the amount of doors? Just let him play with it a bit. Or was the concern, I don't remember the concern being the doors. But
Well, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage here because for the life of me, I can't remember why I missed the December meeting, but I did. I went back to my calendar. I was here. I don't know. Maybe that was one of those times I
Working
was
late.
working
Yeah.
late and just spaced it. That's happened twice then. At any rate. So I don't remember the conversation, so I can't help you.
Do you have, we put up the comparison of the previous design, south elevation and
Shall we go?
Yeah.
shall we go
Gonna
pull
do-
that up?
do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Mhm.
really good.
So. So it's like the upper left shrank. What were the series of doors and windows before this sort of shifted? It was kind of almost the same amount of glazing. And then there's another pair of doors were added and 3 windows.
This Mark, I would go, Matt, with your suggestion of and or. But I think it would help if it, if I took a line down from the second, the top floor all the way down, then that would make it probably 3 larger doors in the bottom or however they'd configure it. But then again, I look at this and it's behind the garage. So, I don't know. And, oh, by the way, just to finish off, so I would go with an and or reduction and give them some room to play with it, like you suggested. And on number 1, I agree with now seeing the context of the neighborhood, right, to the right and the left. Chris, you are absolutely right. We said a wall plane doesn't do it, but to Stacy's point, it has been previously discussed when we had 3-story buildings, moreover, that we needed to have a wall plane change, but also that now he's at 16 feet. This is a 1.5 story. But I do believe, since he said, and it would not cause much pain, I think, if number 1 could just say lower the garage roof by 6 inches, he said, would be achievable. I mean, it's a 1/2 foot. I'm okay with not having a change in wall plane under this condition on that site, especially in context of neighborhood. But I think that lowering it by 6 inches would help us to the passerby on the alley somewhat. And of course, we had 10 feet stepping down from the house ridge to this, but I would suggest, since he agreed to it, the 6 inches on number 1, and I'm okay with the decks on number 2, and I could go with Matt's and or on number 3. Again, it's pretty much behind the garage, except when you're approaching from the east, I guess, so, or west. So Andrew, you want to weigh in?
Andrew's recused.
Oh, well, that's why he's silent. Okay, that's right. I forgot. Well, anyway, can everybody agree to the 6 inches on number 1 and use Matt's language on number 3? And do we strike 2 or narrow the decks on 2? What do we want to do so we can, I guess we could finish this? I'm okay with it.
I haven't chimed in on the decks since these guys talked. I would agree with striking number
Okay.
2.
All right.
I will say, Mark, I would be concerned about asking to lower the garage roof because you're either going to get a change of pitch or I don't know how much of that space is going to start to be usable and count its square footage if you drop it below 5.5 plate. I think it was pretty compelling with that 3D view and the massing of the sides. I think that garage is appropriately scaled.
Okay, let's take a straw poll. Everybody okay with no reduction in height?
Yes.
I am.
All right, then we struck 1 and 2. three was and is there anything else before we have a motion? I think we're ready.
I could make the motion if no one else has anything else to
I can do
discuss.
it if you want.
Okay.
I think I've got it, the wording right here. I move to approve the small scale new construction and minor scale new construction at 536 West Colorado, Lot 31R, Block 9, West Telluride Edition, based on the findings of staff memo dated May 17, 2023, following conditions. Strike number 1, strike number 2, revise number 3 to say reduce the number of doors and or the amount of glazing on the south elevation per HR 26A, and 4 and 5 as written. This motion is based on evidence and testimony provided at a public hearing held on May 17th, 2023, with notice of such hearing provided as required by the Telluride Land Use Code.
Would you accept a friendly amendment? Can I propose a friendly amendment? Number 3, can we add condition HR 25B, which is windows, it's about window to wall ratio.
Okay, I agree with that.
We need a second before a friendly
If
amendment.
if there wasn't a second, you can just add that
Okay,
without a friendly amendment.
All right, well, let's get the second.
Well, I'll second.
Okay.
Okay, and the friendly amendment carries. Are you saying yes, Stacy?
Yes, that's fine.
And yeah, okay, okay. So we have the motion. Let's vote.
Stacy,
Stacy.
yes.
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes.
Chris, yes.
Mark, yes. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Good luck.
We need a second
Oh, yeah,
There's
the
a
demolition.
demolition.
Demo.
Sorry, do we have any discussion on the demolition of the two structures?
No.
Okay. Would somebody please make a motion?
We keep going. Proposed motion for demolition. I move to approve the demolition of two designated structures, 5SM.173 house and THAS number 24 shed inside the THLD located at 536 West Columbia, Lot 31R, Block 9, West Telluride Edition, with the following findings. 1, all the standards of LUC section 7-306A5 through 7-306A9 are met with the following conditions. A demolition permit for the existing structure is subject to approval of the small scale redevelopment plan. Offer the structures and materials for sale or salvage and or recycle as much of the materials as possible. This motion is based on evidence and testimony provided at a public hearing held on May 17, 2023, with notice of such hearing provided as required by the Telluride Land Use Code. Revised plans incorporating the conditions of approval shall be submitted within 60 days of this approval, or this approval becomes null and void. Unless otherwise indicated, the revised drawing submitted for a certificate of appropriateness must be a complete set with any changes to the drawings clouded and labeled. Any changes to the drawings beyond the conditions of approval may result in more than one submittal being required.
Okay,
I'll second.
all right, we have first motion and a second. Stacy, let's vote.
Stacy, yes.
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes.
Chris, yes.
Mark, yes. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Great, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Our last public hearing item is the Straka residence, Columbia Avenue. It's consideration of application for small scale new construction located inside the THLD, which will contain 950 square foot or more of floor area, but not more than 2,500 square foot. Pursuant to Land Use Code Section 7203A1B1. Legal description is Block 4, Lot 27, West Telluride. It's at 450 West Columbia. Historic Residential Zone District, owner James Straka, applicant James Straka, and staff member Jonna Wenzel. Jonna.
Thank you, Chairperson Shambach. So This is an application for new construction of a single-family residence and a detached garage. This site is on the south side of West Columbia Avenue between Aspen and Townsend Streets. It's inside the historic district, and there are a few rated structures on this block of Columbia, but there are several to the south which face Colorado Avenue. This lot is vacant, and the Sanborn maps show that this lot has always been vacant. There's been no development here previously. The proposal is compliant with the land use code dimensional requirements and appears to be compatible in mass, scale, and design with the neighborhood. I will mention that this project was previously reviewed and approved by HARC in October of 2020. Unfortunately, the CA was never issued because revised plans incorporating the conditions of approval were not submitted within 60 days. And so the approval was deemed null and void. The submittal before you today is the same design that was approved in 2020 and includes the revisions that address the previous conditions of approval. It was reviewed under the same design guidelines that we have now. But staff has just a few new conditions that address a couple of changes from the previous, which are to include the location of utilities and vents on the final plans. That's standard. The second one is to move the trash enclosure to the north or east side of the garage so that it is accessible without encroaching onto the neighbor's property. On the site plan, you can see the trash enclosure is between the garage and the property line and the side yard setback, which is permitted, but the access to the trash enclosure seems awkward and it's not clear how it would be accessed without going on to the neighbor's property. And then condition number 3 is to provide a plan to protect the 18-inch in circumference, diameter spruce tree at 460 West Columbia, which is on the neighbor's property. It is a large spruce tree, you see in the photo here. This was a topic of conversation at the last review and also was a condition. I know the applicant has reached out to the neighbor about the tree, and staff encourages the owners to work together to preserve that tree. So staff recommends approval of the application with those conditions listed in the proposed motion. Richard Garber is here in person with us from New York, representing the owner. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Jonna? Okay. Okay, let's hear from the applicant. Welcome.
Thank you, and it's nice to be here in person. Let me just make sure my screen is being shared. Okay, great. As Jonna said, I'm Richard Garber from Grow Architects and representing the client, James Straka. We've been working on this house for a number of years, and it was unfortunate that we did receive approval, as Jonna said, in October 2020. What was missing specifically was some grading plans and information. And if everyone remembers 2020, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and there was some uncertainty about the owner going through with the project. He is now very much committed to it, and those grading plans have been supplied. So briefly, I'm going to take you through a little bit of the zoning and then very specifically address Jonna's comments. So as you see here, the site is isolated. It's a fairly narrow site in the historic residential district. You see here a Google aerial. These are photos that I've taken on my current visit. You could see our actually notice with the mountain in the background you can see, and then the view up the lot facing the school. And that spruce tree in question, you see its leaf canopy does actually engage it hangs over our site. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there's that tree right there. This was a similar photo that was previously shown. Very quickly, the block plan, block elevation, which has been shown. And then our proposed site plan with our points of entry. Vehicular entry is from the alley. It's the filled triangle. And then we have 2 points of pedestrian entry, one from the front on Columbia and one from the lower level. I'll show the plans very quickly. We are completely compliant, just showing the dimensional requirements. So there's no deviations being proposed. I can obviously go into these more if there are any questions about that. And then just very briefly, it's a single family residence. I already talked about the zone. We have a lot size of 2,812.5 square feet. Our proposed principal building, 1,928.88, and our proposed principal accessory structure, its coverage is 231 feet. So that's something that I just wanted to draw to everyone's attention. It was listed in the report as 462. That's because initially we had a second floor proposed in that. We actually have now, there may be a small loft in there max, but because of the roof pitch that I'll show, the new roof pitch from previous comments, this is really only 231 feet. So we're actually further under coverage. Maximum building height is 25 feet. That's where we are. In that accessory structure, there is one enclosed parking space. Trash bins and snow storage are provided on site, and I'll show you in one of the conditions that was listed, our proposed new condition for the trash bin, bike storage in the basement, 15-foot front yard setback. The rear yard for the primary building is 45 feet 11 inches, rear yard for the accessory structure 5 feet, and that gives us a 19-foot 11-inch space between the primary structure and the accessory structure. I'll show a site plan next, and then there are 3 feet side yards. And the building plans are quite simple. They haven't changed, as John has said. We have a basement area for storage, including bike storage, which I have highlighted here. 3 bedrooms on the entry floor, including the ensuite in the rear, which would have views to the mountain with a deck, which is really great. And then our proposed second floor and roof plan. The second floor is one continuous floor with a dining, kitchen, living type arrangement. And then you see our roof plan, and you can see in the roof plan our snow guards, which were part of the design guidelines. That proposed garage I mentioned, so this is the 231 square foot footprint in that accessory structure. You see here the trash bins in their original location, which is on the lot line in the middle drawing, and I'll show you how we think we can reconfigure those. So really quickly, in terms of the historic guidelines, there's a lot of them. The 3 that Jonna drew everyone's attention to, I'll try to address first, and then I'll just kind of quickly go through the others. So starting first with natural resources, the tree. We don't really have any issues with the aspens in the front of the site because of the setback. That rear spruce ends up being, it was on the initial survey we got, it was actually cited incorrectly. That's been corrected, and as you saw from the photos, it is indeed its tree canopy extends into our yard. I've reached out to the owner of the adjacent property multiple times recently, have not heard back from him, but during our previous approval process, I was in touch with him, and we vowed to work with him then. We vow to work with him now. And I think basically there'll be some exploratory digging to basically ascertain where that root structure is and figure out what to do about that without harming the roots of that tree. I will also note, and you can actually see from one of those photos that I had up before, there are some, I guess you can't really see them, but just beyond this canopy over here, there are some, there's some electrical equipment, some infrastructure equipment that actually sits on a pad. So we're going to take all of this into consideration. Again, this is fortunately only for the accessory structure, which is a fairly small scale thing. that's the tree canopy. So we have no issue continuing to work with the neighbor, and after a little bit of exploration through digging, when the time comes, a plan to protect the root system of that tree will be provided. Second, with respect to the trash utilities, you see in the blue sketch on the left, the blue on the left sketch, excuse me, where they were originally proposed on that lot line, actually adjacent to that tree. We are now proposing to move them actually to the front of the structure. So it would be in that 19-foot 11-inch space between the main house and the garage. And it's simple enough to basically take the trash from there and just move it right around to the alley where collection will occur. So we see that as a nice solution, and again, absolutely willing to do it. So those are, I think that those are the primary conditions. Just to go through site context and materials, I think everyone has reviewed the plan. This is a slightly more contemporary take on some of the Victorian motifs and proportions that you see in town. You see here the site materials called out. This is the front elevation of the house. I have some materials that I'm happy to pass around. We're finally back doing these in person, so I can bring materials again. I can bring them up in a second. I'd like to see them. And then with regard to on-site hazards, bless you. It is noted the site is in a floodplain. It's in the zone AO. We've had numerous comments with Sam Samuelson about this on the way to permitting, and think that we have, through the grading plan that's been submitted, that very much under control. Relationship to the town grid, this is that block elevation that's shown again. That addition in the house next to us actually has expanded since I've last been here. But nonetheless, I think that our house is appropriate, and also appropriate in terms of the size. Here you see that dashed line that shows the edge of roof height adjacent to us to the right, our roof height, and then the height of the neighbor, whose house I understand was actually created before the guidelines were in place, so it's a little bit taller. No issue there. Pedestrian scale is being handled through the step in the roof that occurs, and you can see that in the east elevation here. It's occurring in a small decorative motifed roof that exists on the front elevation at the front entry door. And then the accessory structure, as I noted before, originally was planned with a second floor. That roof, since our last appearance at HARC, has switched from a gabled roof to two shed roofs at further step. And so you can actually see in the diagonal lines that I've drawn that kind of stepping that occurs down to the alley, with the accessory structure being fairly small scale. No views, in our opinion, are adversely impacted. And I can also put up in a second that rendering again, which shows the views behind the house facing south to the mountain, the north facing portion of the mountain. This is the engineered site plan that was included. I just show it. Rob Harry's the PE that worked with us from Goff is available on the Zoom if there are any questions. But I do think that the site grading is logical, makes sense, and I think speaks to water management, stormwater management issues and snow melt issues. This is that setback that I talked about, that 19-foot 11 inches between our two structures. So there's a bit of space in there. And then you can actually see the lower photo, which I actually took that this morning, of the conditions. So this is looking up at the site. Finally, the orientation, or almost finally, the orientation of that accessory structure allows for vehicular entry from the alley. And we've modulated the size of that structure to fit the vehicle nicely. The step down that occurs from front to back you see articulated here in our east elevation. So we have a 38-foot ridge length that is at a 9 to 12 pitch that then steps down 18 inches. And then after 18 inches, it's an 18-foot 7-inch ridge length to the back of the primary structure. And that roof is an 8-on-12 roof. And then finally, building form. I showed these views already. You see the decks that we have where we have 4x4 wood posts supporting these decks. There was some initial questions about the thickness of those posts being appropriately sized. They've been re-thickened and now clad in wood. And then I have some paint specs here in terms of colors that are fairly consistent with what is listed on the Zoom, as well as the colors that are represented here. One, I think, change that has happened is we have this kind of rough hewn decorative clapboard that exists on top of the building elevation on both front and back. That was a change from a scallop that we had some 2 years ago. You see that again here. So this is the roof form. The architectural character of the block, which again, I think we're maintaining. And then this is just from Jana's report. The style of the house is a modern interpretation of Victorian, which is sympathetic to the neighborhood. The first level decks, so these are the decks that you see here, measures 15 by 7, second 15 by 5, so they step as well. And the front entry porch is consistent with the traditional front porches. And then you see a view of that. Some more material call outs on that rear elevation. Windows, again, showing that we are following the design guidelines to the right, as well as 2 skylights in the roof. And then a kind of final view of the elevations, roof, accessory structure, almost done. The accessory structure here shows the location of the trash, which will be moved. And then finally lighting, which is a kind of vertically posted lighting. It's a great WS you see by WAC lighting, and that is primarily a down light, so that will not shine, it will not project out. And there's also some lighting on the steps just for accessibility as well. And that is it. So that's the rendering again with the north facing portion of the mountain behind us. We're very excited about this. We apologize for the delay in bringing this back, but I am here to report that the owner is very keen on moving this forward. So hopefully board will find that there's no significant changes from what we had last time. So thanks.
Okay, very good. Good summary. Questions for the applicant? I have one, while everybody's thinking maybe. On drawing A202, could you put that up?
A202, yeah, I'm gonna just gotta go to my PDF.
All right. I did a it's an elevation of the out of the.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so from the grade to the top of the gable on, after you step down 18 inches, I'm calculating it's about 22 feet plus from that grade up through those decks, trying to get the height of that wall plane up to the top of that gable. Again, it's stepped down 18 inches from the main part of the house. Is 22 feet about, am I approximately correct?
So our 25 feet is, I'm just trying to look at this right now. So the way that this works with average grade, the main height here is at 29.3, but when we measure it, it's 25. So if we take that down 8,
18 inches, so
18 inches, yeah, 18.
27 and a half.
Yeah, I can get that dimension back to you, but I think 22 is actually pretty fair.
Okay, 22, a little over 22, I think. And so that answered my question. My concern was as you heard in the previous dialogue, we had a 1.5 story, 16-foot tall building where we had a shed roof breaking it up, but we've declared for consistency that decks alone, without a change in wall plane, are not really stepping down the alley. Of course, the question is, well, you've answered my dimensional question. I just want to see if any of the other board members have questions about that, and or Richard, I could say, what could you suggest to get a further step down besides just using those 2 decks? Because you're at least a little over 22 feet straight up wall plane without a break coming and facing the alley.
Yeah, I see. So I think the one thing that I would say about the decks is that when we initially conceived them, they were sort of understood as one mass, meaning that our columns kind of went up 2 stories and kind of captured both of the decks. That's now been broken up so that the structural elements of these decks are the 4x4 posts that are clad, so they get to be about probably 8 inches when all is said and done for the base, and that's the longer deck, and the deeper deck, excuse me. And then there's actually a 45-degree structural mount that is actually projecting out from the building itself. So while I understand the concern about the plane, I actually think when you see this in elevation, and we're looking at the side elevation now, I can go back to the front elevation or the back elevation. And I take it, this is a flat drawing. This is where a Revit model is useful, I guess. But I do actually think that with the projection of the roof coming past the house, and that's by 2 feet, and then the projection of the second floor deck with the 45-degree structural armature, and then the lower deck that projects further. I mean, I do think that this is, I think that there's visually, it's not overly complex, but I think it works with the concept of stepping down. And I think 3-dimensionally, you wouldn't really notice that wall as a planar surface. Now, I suppose we could explore taking a small amount more square footage in the basement and that first floor, which would, give you like a true building step. But I'm not really sure how, I do feel like we could probably prepare a 3D drawing for you that might alleviate your concerns. And then as a backup, I suppose we could look at taking a small amount more coverage, but I actually do think that as conceived now, you're looking at this over the shed, which actually now has a break-in roof plane. And then you have these kinds of 3 components happening that are projecting to different depths off of that wall that I think is, I believe is meeting the intent of the guideline.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay. Hearing none. Thank you, Richard. Any public comment? Okay, don't hear any. So we can begin deliberations. We have 3 proposed conditions and comment on, well, they're all pretty standard. And I would also appreciate your comment on the step down, which I brought up to the alley. And but who wants to go first? Comments?
I can go first. Mark, let me know if this is what you remember. I don't remember this project being very controversial in the deliberations or in the meetings. I think it was a pretty easy approval. There might have been something about the ornamental element at the entry stoop that they resolved. So I guess from my point of view, I don't see the reason just to approve it with the condition that Jonna has stated instead of sort of taking another bite of the apple at this one.
Okay. Others?
Mark, I do share your concern with the three-story plane. It's something we seem to discuss at every park meeting in one way or the other. And not to just have a conscious stream of thought conversation with myself here like I do sometimes, but I think the options here aren't necessarily better. We could propose a step back at one floor level and then create this weird little shed roof waterproofing nightmare. We could do that. We could propose that the deck railings were somehow more solid to accentuate the stepping down that the decks provide, but then we're increasing mass. I think in this case, I like the simplicity of the way the two decks, and I do appreciate that the lower deck protrudes further than the upper. So the way that the decks are articulated or treated is helping with the stepping down. And I'll go back to what I went where I went with the last project. We're substantially back from the alley, and so the secondary structure for me provides the bulk of that stepping down. And so I'm happy to continue to have conversations about stepping down, but I think in this case, it's achieved.
May I just say one more? Can I say, I should just also say, if I may, there is the material change that happens there. So we actually have the clapboard, which is the primary clap for the second.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard.
I agree with Stacy
Sorry.
on the stepping down.
I do too.
I do as well.
Yep. I do have a
Oh.
funny number 2.
Okay. Well, I think listen to your point about how it actually steps because the bottom deck is further out and we're so far off the alley. I will go with the majority. And so I guess we have 3 conditions. Any other comments, concerns?
I don't see how the trash enclosure works on the north side of the garage. I know that sounds silly, but being logical, if it's not close to the alley, they're never going to be put back in there and they're going to be left out on the alley. And I know it's a funny comment, but just living in that alley, if it's not convenient, it doesn't happen. And I don't know. And having the bears go into the yard versus keeping them on the alley. Anyway, I just wondered if you would consider, I don't know, making it a nice trash enclosure on the alley side.
Or on the east side.
On the east side.
Of the garage.
Like a standalone, or just.
Yep.
I just think pulling it away from the other side of the structure, and I know this really sounds silly, it won't happen. They'll be left out there.
I don't think that's a problem. I think we could, yes.
Okay. Well, sorry, we're not supposed to have dialogue, but thanks for your input.
Yeah,
I mean, Chris lives in the neighborhood. She sees it, she feels it, and
they're there every day.
yep. Okay, are we ready? Well, let's, Stacy, Matt, I guess, weigh in on that thought.
I think she has a good point. I don't know where in the guidelines we can require that, but practical consideration.
Yeah, neighborly.
Sounds like the applicant was willing to do that. Anyway.
I had one other point about almost all the other project, we have a planting plan and schedule included on here. And I know he mentions protecting the existing trees, but we don't know what he's planning for the rest of it. So I'd like to add number 4. Planting plan and schedule per HR, blah, blah, blah. HR number 14C, C1, C2, and C3.
Everybody good with that?
I am.
Okay. Are we ready?
You want to make the motion since you've
I've
got
been
the,
doing
addition-
them all.
well, you've got the other
Oh,
piece of it. That way I don't have to approve the amendment.
all right. I move to approve the proposed small scale new construction, 450 West Columbia Avenue, lot 27, block 4, West Telluride Edition, based on a staff memo dated May 17th, 2023, calling conditions. 1 is stated. 2, move the trash enclosure to the east side of the garage so that it's accessible without encroaching into the neighbor's property, deleting north or. Provide plan to protect the 18 spruce tree at 460 West Columbia, consistent with land use code 3-505. 1, and add number 4, provide a planting plan and schedule per HR number 14C, C1, C2, and C3. This motion is based on evidence testimony provided at a public hearing held on May 17th, 2023, with notice of such hearings provided as required by the Telluride Land Use Code. Revised plan incorporating the conditions of approval shall be submitted within 60 days of this approval. This approval becomes null and void unless otherwise indicated. The revised drawings submitted for certificate of appropriateness must be a complete set with any changes to the drawings clouded and labeled. Any changes to the drawings beyond the conditions of approval may result in more than one submittal being required.
Matt will second.
Okay. Let's vote.
Stacy, yes.
Matt, yes.
Bob, yes.
Chris, yes.
Mark, yes.
Andrew,
Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
Yep, we're unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Good luck.
See you. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the public hearing items. So move on to the work session item tonight, land use code amendments. Work session to discuss potential amendments to the land use code pertaining to new construction on lots with a pre-construction grade of 25% or greater in the residential type zone districts, new construction with below grade site coverage in the residential type zone districts, and new construction which includes 2 or more levels below grade in the residential type zone districts per land use code, section 5201C. Jonna.
Excuse
Okay,
me, can I ask
yes.
for a break for
Oh,
2 minutes?
can we take a 2-minute break?
Yes,
Thank you.
me too.
Great. Good call.
My time?
You live so far away.
Well, it just all worked out. I was doing it, but now. So I'm looking at the HARC board. I got 4 out of 4 in-person licensed architects. This is. I've not seen this before.
Do you like it?
You guys know I totally. I'm like, hell yeah, man.
Just shut up those observations.
Yeah. It's like 1, 2, maybe. You're lucky.
What?
What about the rest of them?
Upstairs, out by the M&M machine, it says like
Oh, good.
private or no access or something. So thrown with how they're doing from the wall. Where is it? The battery's dead, so Jonna took it upstairs.
I was still on planning and zoning.
Well, this is the thing, you gotta sort of be realistic and just, just, you're there, you wanna walk and meet and not like, feel like an idiot the next day. Yeah. But despite what peer pressure or what you think, might seem like the thing to do in the moment. That's right. Like if Kevin shows up. I'm here to preview what I'm gonna be part of. Is that, or is it gonna be the same? Okay, well then then, yeah, that's why I'm here.
Extra prepared.
A little bit, I feel a little bit, I would like to know what the work session is gonna be.
Are HARC meetings in the same week?
Yeah.
This month.
Yeah. 4 months this year, they're back to back.
Part of the code.
Well, that's
So there's
fun.
no packet.
Except for you.
I'll have a jump on some of my other issues tomorrow. What we got going on? How many weeks are you? Oh, all right.
Being recorded. I heard something is up between his eyes. And he had surgery to repair that, but it wasn't.
That is all planned.
Vision wasn't getting better, so they did what's called a gas bubble. Surgery, they put a gas bubble between the. But the bubble has to stay in place, so he was face down in a yoga chair or a yoga table for 5 or 7 days. Jeez, he get up 10 minutes, a couple times a day, he was go to the bathroom, whatever, but he had to get that bubble in place. And then I guess his recovery's slow and long. He says it's still.
What is that background behind you?
Fuzzy.
Whiskey runs.
So, but it's probably something he's gonna.
Does anybody know where that is?
Could be anywhere really,
I
right?
think it's Mark.
No, I think he got it online.
No, this is my work. This is.
Oh,
my
did you?
work plan.
No, we're talking about Mark's.
Oh, Mark's.
Yeah, that
background.
one.
Whiskey runs.
It's in Alaska.
Yours is,
Okay, all set?
yes.
We're all here.
Okay, Jonna, take it away.
Okay. Hold up there. So this is the first work session where we will be discussing the basement issues, which I'll go over in a second, but we plan to have 2 work sessions on these issues with HARC and 2 with P&Z. So tonight, very informal, and hope to have some good dialogue and discussion. So we're here talking about this tonight because on March 28th, Town Council enacted a temporary suspension of 6 items pertaining to the land use code and things that they wanted staff and the HARC and P&Z boards to look at. The first one was to review PUD benefits. That one was taken care of at the joint meeting on April 27th when HARC provided an R&R, P&Z provided an R&R. It's been to Town Council for the first reading already, so that one is well on its way and we can put a check mark next to that one. The second one was ballot question 300, which has to do with subdivisions. Ron is working on that one and he plans to bring an R&R to you on June 21st. We're not planning to have a work session at HARC on that because HARC doesn't really review subdivisions and doesn't even provide R&Rs anymore. The item number 3 was the residential commercial zone district and the maximum residential floor area, which we recommended be set at 4,000 square feet to be consistent with other residential zone districts. Again, HARC provided an R&R at the joint meeting on April 27th, as did P&C. That one has also had a first reading at Town Council, so we can check that one off. The 4th item on the list was for development applications for new construction on lots with a pre-construction grade or slope of 25% or greater in the residential zone districts. And as shorthand, we'll refer to this item as steep lots or steep slopes. This is everything on the hillside. Item number 5 in the temporary suspension list were applications for new construction, which include below grade floor area in excess of allowable site coverage in the residential zone districts. And this you could think of as the bonus site coverage, which is allowed in some of the residential districts and allows up to 10% of the lot area. And then number 6 of the items is about development applications for new construction, which includes 2 or more levels below grade in the residential zone districts. And again, a shorthand, we're referring to this one as the double basement issue, basement stacked over basement. So I'm gonna approach these 4, 5, and 6 in reverse order because 6 is the easiest, I think, and work towards the hardest, which is number 4. So for number 6, double basements, we haven't seen a lot of these proposed in town. We are starting to see them. We've had a few HARC approvals of projects with double basements. And a work session where a double basement was proposed in the hillside. In Aspen, we've looked at other communities on all of these issues. And in Aspen, for example, they do not allow more than one level below finished grade. And the maximum height of that basement is 15 feet. I think they had an incident or an approval where an owner applied for and received a very large basement that could include a full-size basketball court below grade. And so that's when Aspen took action to restrict the amount of below grade space that could be allowed.
First question.
Yes.
Your example though would be floor area, not the depth, right? If they had a basement that extended past the house, the footprint of the house.
I think they had a basement that was like 20 or 25 feet deep.
Deep.
It's deep
This way.
this way.
This way.
Tall.
Tall,
Oh. You could
Basketball
put, you could
court.
put 2 floors in.
right,
Or a basketball.
Or
basketball court.
I'd like that.
Yeah. If you're an NBA player, I can see why you would need it, but again, I think this is pretty straightforward. However, flat lots seem to differ from steep lots. It's easy to say we would allow no more than 1 floor below grade on flat lots. So you have 1 basement. On steep lots, it's a little bit different because there are several levels that are stacked below grade. So we might need a little bit different language, but I think the intent is maybe to avoid this kind of sub basement or basement below
And
your
that's
entry
right
grade.
there, because the one at the dashed line, right? That first one above your red box would be considered our new basement, right?
And this is
That's the,
100%.
okay.
Yeah, it's almost it's way more than 50% below grade.
Yeah.
However, I guess this could also be considered the entry level, and maybe this would be okay. I don't know. We're looking for feedback, but this is the first time we've seen this extra basement on a hillside lot. Typically, the entry level is the lowest level we've seen to date. I think we should discuss these one at a time. So if you have feedback at this point, happy to hear it, ideas. Always in that.
So
Could you go to the next slide? maybe?
I have a few thoughts. I'm glad to hear that we're gonna handle these differently based on whether it's a steep lot or not. I think when it's a flat lot in town, the concept of a double basement is pretty straightforward. It's a basement on top of another basement, right? But when we get into hillside lots, I mean, there's kind of 4 there, right? And if we say there's no double basements on a hillside lot, that's impactful. So I think it's a really big conversation or a really small conversation, depending on which one we're talking about.
It's the percentage, right? Because we're at 50%.
So that's the next
Okay.
topic.
Yeah,
Okay, so, but I think they have to go together.
They are.
They're all together, yes.
So on this example, we have the box with the arrows. The entry to the house is 2 boxes up. You enter at,
The entry is right above the red box.
that's the main entry.
Yes.
And
And
because
has-
it's more than 50% into the hillside, it's considered a basement.
Well, then, and the next level up is considered a
Well, they all
basement,
are.
and the
Pretty
next
much.
level above that is considered, I mean,
I guess in principle, on steep lots, what do you think about this sub basement or additional below grade level?
I would question, why do you need it? But some people need.
We can't
big
ask that
houses. I know.
question.
Based on recent experience, this will push the limits of what can be shored. And I think that's why maybe we don't see it or haven't seen it as much.
This is very expensive.
If it's even feasible, right? I mean, this would require, this would exceed standard micropile shoring,
Yep.
right? So they're looking at horizontal soil nailing,
Sheet piling.
sheet piling. Yeah, it gets real it's a construction nightmare real quick. So maybe that's why it hasn't been proposed. I don't know.
This isn't a project. This is just a sample.
This is a project the work session we saw.
No, the sample you have there isn't something.
We saw a few
Yeah,
months
that's the
ago
work session.
Oh, it
at
did,
a work
okay.
session.
I don't think you were here.
Is everyone supportive of no double basements on flat lots?
I think I would like for the problem to be defined, because I haven't heard the defined problem. Other than what I'm sensing is that bigger houses are a bad thing, but I've not heard a defensible argument of why this would not be allowed from sort of a HARC purview of we should be concerned about what's happening above grade in the exterior.
So on a flat lot, potential of 2 basements. I think that's one question. And then the other question is this.
You're asking why not 2 basements? Like, what's the problem? We have them. We've done them in recent years.
My understanding is
They're on flat lots. I agree. They're not great space. That's not our call. Right? But do we? And the only reason, when we did that work session with P and Z, there was concern about water and soil, but nobody's taken it that far.
Well, it depends on where the site is.
Right.
Groundwater.
Right.
Well, as it turns out, I'm intimately familiar with the project on the left side, which is hard to read here what's going on with that diagram on the left side. I can, not the center, the one all the way on the left, that one. So that's a double basement. It's hard to tell, but the top one is basement. And then a portion right where the cursor is a second true sub basement on a relatively flat lot. I can tell you water is not an issue there. This is far north in town.
So the T-shaped piece that's below is under that section.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
the second base.
That's going to be, so again, and this is your, what are we trying to address, right? The construction impact that will be felt in the neighborhood for sure. Once the project's completed, nobody but the owners or guests would know that that second basement is there. So why a year after construction is this an issue anymore? I guess that's a question.
Yeah, I'm to finish my first statement. I have heard through hearsay that when this started happening in Aspen, that the reason that they stopped allowing basements deeper than 15 feet were for construction mitigation issues. And I think the big question is this the town sort of guarding the neighboring property and the public from unmitigated construction issues between noise and disturbance and undermining, or is that our purview?
Truck traffic, export traffic.
It's a deeper dig, so it's more shoring, it's more excavation. So it's just a question.
Yeah.
Have you guys spoken to any folks over in Aspen? Have we gotten an explanation of why they enacted this?
No, my impression was because they've had bad experiences or excessive asks. You're right about not fully defining the problem. It seems that this is an issue that's above HARC's pay grade, to say it simply. I think there's some maybe social concerns or, kind of comprehensive plan or master planning issues that council has asked us all to take a look at. At this point, we don't have any recommendations or know where this is going to go, but we do need to have this conversation right now. So I'm asking you for feedback on some of this is not generally HARC's purview, but you're still involved in the process. You still review projects like this. Most of you are involved in the business, and we've been asked to talk about it.
I remember one of the issues about that particular project is visibly it's 4 stories high.
Well, right, and that's why this is 2 separate conversations. Everything I just said about once construction is complete, this goes away is
That is
not
true.
true for the one on the steep hillside.
And we're gonna talk about that issue in a few minutes, but right now, I mean, one of the issues that has been identified in this suspension is a concern over double basements.
Just to jump back to an earlier comment, I agree with Stacy that the overall, the flatter lots in town are easier to deal with. I think there's a nuance about where you judge the 15 feet. Is it the average grade or is it at any point along the existing or pre-construction grade?
It may not be 15 feet here, maybe.
Sure,
something else.
whatever that number is. I do think it's important that we think about it as an overall depth and not a double basement, because you could do a 20-foot deep basement and then put another floor in later. So thinking of it as sort of that, how tall that's, how much volume of height there is below grade is probably the right way to talk about it.
I mean, yeah, just as a practical consideration, 18 feet is sort of the limit of micropile shoring, which is what's done almost exclusively in town. So beyond 18 feet, the limits of, well, I mean, I shouldn't, yeah. Well, I think part of what's happening is the price per square foot has gotten to such a point that every square inch is worth a lot. So if I have to bring in a rig and do more complicated shoring for that really expensive square footage, people will. So whatever.
So that kind of begs the question that we have, if you start to step in from to the center of your lot with a deeper basement and you're able to mitigate those micropiling impacts, shoring impacts by stair stepping that down, even though that might not be a really practical way to do it, would that be allowed? Or are we just sort of gonna nip it in the bud and say you can't go deeper than X?
Good question. I think another way is to word what or to put that in a different way is I don't want to arrive at an arbitrary number, and I don't think Aspen did arrive at an arbitrary number. I'd like to know how they got to 15 feet. What's significant about 15 feet? And I would then, like us, if we're going to go down this road to arrive at a number that's defensible from a construction standpoint or from some standpoint, not just, I don't feel like that's ethical or whatever.
I think it would be a good idea to get a contractor, preferably someone who does shoring and excavation, to chime in on what's feasible, what's practical, other than architects and chatting about it.
Could we get some more information from that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's all
I think
good.
that would be good.
Good direction. Yeah.
Give us some Feel for why.
Should we kind of keep going through the other ones and we can
Yeah.
circle back? It's because they probably all intertwine.
Yeah, and we'll get to it. I know we'll get to it in number 4. But to me, the biggest problem is that it's entirely feasible to design a project that is effectively 0 square feet.
Yes.
Right, that to
Yeah.
me, that's something we need to address.
Yes.
So we'll get to
I
that.
will-
Yeah.
Design that project. 0 square feet basement.
If all 4 of your levels are basement, none of them count as square footage.
So,
Yeah. Almost that one.
actually this goes,
But at
well,
the HARC level,
At the HARC level, or
the building.
no, but we're at HARC right now.
we
I
have,
know, I'm just saying that, yeah.
we actually have an application right now, or that is 0 square feet. That is per our land use code, 0 square feet above grade because of the way we define basements.
Wow.
So there seems to be some disconnect between the way we calculate floor area and the way we define basements. There's something missing in those hillside lots.
Percentage.
And aren't some projects just going to a staff level review and, to a chair level review instead of a full board, or they're minor.
Well, we have a few right now that could be staff level review that are 5,000 or 6,000 square foot area. That is per the land use code all below grade, which we could review administratively, but we're elevating to the chair because it's still a large structure. But again, it doesn't seem logical that we can have a 6,000 foot area structure and have it count as 0 square feet. There's a problem there.
There's a disconnect. For
Yeah.
sure.
Shall I go on?
Good. I wonder if there's a way to maybe look at different percentages of allowable, what constitutes a basement versus what constitutes as the structure, visible structure. If that were, look at it, what if this one was 25% and what if it was
I'm gonna
70%?
show you some examples of that in just a
Okay.
minute.
You're ahead of me.
Okay, so I'm gonna go on. The next issue is the bonus site coverage issue. Again, this is in residential, in the residential, historic residential, and hillside transitional zone districts. About 8 years ago, the land use code was amended to allow up to 10% additional site coverage
10% of the
based on lot area. Yes. So this has been included in the suspension. There are several rules that go along with this site coverage bonus usage. And I'll just briefly try to summarize what those are. The additional 10% up to 525 square feet maximum has to be 100% below grade. It cannot be expressed in any way above grade, which means it can't have a window well or egress stairs. You can't know that it's there. Number 2 is that it has to project beyond the foundation that has walls expressed above grade. So it can't be part of the existing site coverage or the existing foundation. It has to be beyond that outline. Number 3 is that, again, it can't have any elements visible from the exterior. It can't exceed 525 square feet maximum. It can't be located less than 3 feet from the side yard property lines. And if it's applied to more than one level below grade, it counts for each level. So if it's stacked, again, in a double basement, it would count twice. So most applicants that we've seen use, with the exception of a few, use bonus site coverage, use it incorrectly. Here is an example we had submitted recently where there's a window well adjacent to this green bonus site coverage area. Here is an example of bonus site coverage in the red hashed area that's less than 3 feet from the property line.
Below a historic. Anyway.
Yes. Here is a bonus site coverage below a front porch that has windows in the front of it. This one actually was counted accurately. It's 2 levels that are 100% below grade that have been counted. But this causes lots of issues. A lot of people think that it's 10% of the allowed site coverage instead of lot area.
Because that's how it was originally in the code. It was written wrong.
So we also see that it's used kind of helter-skelter. It's used a dab here, a dab there, a dab over here.
You're using all my projects.
I'm not identifying them though, Stacy. I've never set an address on any of these. So some use the maximum. This one used 41 square feet of it. I'm not sure why. This one used about half of it, but again, it's kind of here and there instead of just increasing your area, you know, to provide an additional room below grade. I don't know that it's a terrible idea, but again, we find that it's misused more than it's appropriately used. And actually, we're finding that most applicants aren't using it.
So when you say it's misused, are you catching that and then correcting the applicant?
We catch it most of the time and sometimes we don't.
Okay.
I've seen a couple projects lately where we have not caught it.
So are you saying this is sort of administratively a troublesome?
Very.
Okay.
Quick question on the example you showed that there was the porch that had the windows below it.
Yep.
If it didn't have windows, but it's above grade, would that count?
If it's 18 inches or less
Below
above
a
grade.
Below a HARC approved.
Yep.
Okay, I can't read it from here.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
I get
it's,
it. Okay, so a slab on, you know, it's a slab on grade would be okay,
it could be
a patio.
up to 18 inches above grade under a front porch, or it could be below a patio or a slab in the back or in the front. It's
That's not great.
100% below grade.
I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, but I do think that actually the piecemeal approach works best for laying out spaces versus just putting a room there. I'm wondering if you, on an administrative level, if you could require sort of overlay diagram that would clearly show you where it's bleeding out instead of having to sort of root through the drawings to figure that out, if that would be a way to make it easier to process and understand if it's compliant or not.
Perhaps. I'll mention also that recently we, on a couple of hillside projects, the additional site coverage bonus area was creating complications in the way height was calculated. The height was being calculated incorrectly because of the site coverage bonus area. So it creates a myriad of issues for applicants and for staff. I suppose it could be further simplified. We did simplify this maybe 3 or 4 years ago. There were 9 criteria, and some of them were redundant with existing land use code requirements. So we simplified it, but along with the conversation about basements, we needed to talk about this specifically.
Because these spaces are by definition basements.
Yes.
Do the windows under that porch trouble everybody? I'm asking that as a question. I'm not sure.
It's not supposed to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we wrote it, this has been written fairly restrictively, but I see how it may need some wordsmithing for people to understand it and or use it properly, but
But I get that it's complicated. I'm responsible for 3 of the examples, but it's going, I was on planning and zoning when this came through. It was part of a larger reduction. It was part of it. There was the larger exercise was aimed at reducing mass and scale above grade, which we did. And this was an attempt at giving some of that square footage back that had been taken or had been reduced, not taken, it had been reduced. So I mean, the simplest thing would just to eliminate this. If it's a headache, we just get rid of it, but then we're getting rid of something that was of a bigger conversation. So I don't want to unravel the bigger conversation by just trying to solve this complicated, smaller part of it.
So I was not here at the time, but my understanding is that this came through concurrently with the reduction of side yard setbacks, or sorry, the increase of side yard setbacks on larger lots.
That was part of it.
yep.
But it didn't affect the overall available floor area above grade. That it didn't reduce the floor area, it just pushed the balloon from the sides.
I think there was a reduction in floor area.
That's
But-
not what my colleagues have told me.
Could I suggest that this is a more minor issue than the other things? And then we sort of move on to the other bigger things and then come back and.
Sure. I still have a stack because and if it's helpful, when this first came through, it was written poorly. There were missing sections that if you had a lot that was over 7,500 square feet, there was no section that addressed it. It got omitted somehow. So there was this cleaning up that happened.
Mhm.
So I think it's 9 versions of the land use code now. It was amended.
So it was bad to begin with.
It was bad 9 times.
Yeah,
So if that's helpful.
okay,
it
well,
up.
it is part of the basement conversation and maybe part of a larger conversation, but it is kind of a discrete part of our site coverage that adds a level of complexity to our land use code that doesn't need to be there. And I think we'd all prefer to have a more accessible land use code.
So does everybody just straw poll and then let's go on like Matt suggested, agree that maybe we try to clarify the language even further, but we're not trying to take away what we did 8 years ago. I was there, I was the one made the proposal and it was hand in hand with the increase in setbacks, which, reduced, I should say, just put more space obviously between buildings. And I mean, and in some cases, depending on the lot, it might have reduced floor area. I don't remember, but I mean, do we have a straw poll? Does everybody concur we just want to clean this up, or people think we need to give it back? Out of sight, out of mind was the theory then.
I would prefer that they can attempt to revise it so that it's more easy to understand and apply than to eliminate it.
Do we have consensus on that? So Jonna has a flavor?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, Jonna.
I'm just making a note. Okay. So, number 4 is the one about steep slopes,
It's a steep site.
which we've identified as, for now, as grade of 25% or greater. Now, we have had a couple of brainstorming sessions among current and previous planning staff. And we have come up with a few different possible approaches. I will walk you through some of them and show you kind of implications of how those might be applied and what would happen if they were. One is the Aspen model. It's a different model than the no double basements. Changing the definition of basement such that it's maybe a greater percentage below grade. Right now it's 50%. Limiting the number of stories that are visible, limiting the facade width, and which doesn't necessarily touch the basement issue, but also perhaps limiting the maximum total area, basement and above. So I'll walk us through each one of these approaches as expeditiously as I can. So in Telluride, as you all know, a basement is the space that has at least half of its area below grade. 50% or more below grade is considered a basement. So in this example, the first level is 100% below grade, so it counts as 0 square feet. The second level is 94% below grade, so it counts as 0 square feet. The third level is 71% below grade, so it counts as 0 square feet. And the fourth level is 36% below grade, so it counts as entirely above grade, which is 766 square feet. This is one of these examples where there's quite a disconnect between the total floor area and the actual land use code floor area. I don't know what the total floor area of this is, but it's fairly large. In Aspen, they calculate the actual above grade floor area. So in this same example, level 1 is 100% below grade. There's 0 square feet. Level 2 is 94% below grade, which is actually equivalent to 323 square feet above grade, or this orange wedge of grade. Level 3 is 71% below grade, which is the equivalent of 592 square feet above grade. And similarly on the fourth level, which is 36% below grade, is the equivalent of 275% or 275 square feet above grade. This is a more accurate way of counting floor area, above grade floor area.
We'll touch it because we'll turn on. So, right. So this level, when you count this little portion,
Okay, it's
That's pretty picky,
negligible.
Stacy.
This is just an illustration.
Well, no, and then, so then this one is from roughly here, right? It's
Yes.
counting this much square footage. That's a lot more than 94%.
It's 94% below grade.
Below grade.
The white,
This
yes.
is it's above grade.
94%.
I didn't label it.
So in that illustration, everything that is orange is
Orange
counted as square
Counted.
footage.
Yep,
So back to this. This.
yes,
count, okay.
and that's
And then over
323
here,
square feet.
Forward.
Yes, yes.
We can do area counts.
The Aspen model seems more equitable. Doesn't,
I agree.
basically flat lots in town are kind of judged this way, and this is a
Yes.
similar way to look at it. There's some minor differences,
Right.
but it seems like a better way to do this.
It seems a more logical way to count it, for sure, on sloped lots.
There's a question of, the tools, the old school architect with a pencil, are they gonna have the capabilities of doing this? The level of accuracy if someone uses a computer model, but those are nuances.
So I'm gonna come back to this, but I'm gonna talk about the next.
What's that total square footage though? Just see what that did compared to, we got 765 square foot in our current
Mark,
model.
It's not terribly relevant at the moment. I'm gonna show you some comparisons here in
Oh,
just
okay.
2 more slides. But I
Okay.
want to talk about kind of the next approach that we went after, which is changing the percentage of basement. Right now, our rule is 50% or more below grade counts as basement or doesn't count towards your floor area. So in the same model, 100% below grade, second level 94%, third level 71%, and fourth level 36%. We ran some numbers on some approved projects. What if our basement was 75% below grade? In this instance, the first and second level would not count because they are 75% or more below grade. The third and fourth level would count because they're less. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
And then we ran it with 100%, in which case only the ground level would not be counted and all the other levels would be counted towards their maximum floor area. So this is quite small. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. And I don't want to kind of overwhelm, but we charted this out on several of examples. I did 5 or 6. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 that kind of make the point. But at this top chart, this is assuming that we changed the definition of basement from 50% to 75% or 100%. In this example of this structure that's been approved, it does significantly increase the above grade floor area, but it doesn't exceed the maximum floor area that's allowed. This is an HD2 zoning, which counts volume. I'm taking this example and assuming maybe it's in HD1, which would have a 5,000 square foot maximum just for illustration purposes. It does significantly increase the floor area, but it doesn't go over the maximum allowed. Then we looked at Telluride floor areas compared to the Aspen method of calculating floor area. And in this example, under our land use code, it has a floor area of 766 square feet. And the Aspen calculation has a floor area of 1,190 square feet. It's not terribly significant and it doesn't get anywhere near their maximum. So the next example, same thing, 50%, 75%, and 100% below grade. 75% did nothing, same floor area calculation. 100% below grade really blew it out of the water and caused it to go way over their maximum floor area, which is 3,090 square feet. But looking at the Telluride and Aspen methods of calculating floor area, again, not a significant difference, surprisingly, in floor area.
Can you repeat what you said about the 100%? What's the numbers and what's the allowable and what's the number?
So the allowable total floor area is 3,090. And if this were counted as 100% below grade, it would be 4,253. So almost 1,200 square feet over.
These figures are the same.
Yeah.
That's just the way they calculate.
75% makes no difference.
Really?
Nope.
Because of the way it's set into the hill.
Yep. Because all of these are more than 75% below grade. The only one that isn't is the top level. So here's another example. This one's a little bit different because there's more floor area above grade. Again, 75%, however, did nothing to change it. 100% below grade increased it enough to push it over the maximum floor area. So none of these examples I'm showing you would be permitted with if 100% below grade was our definition of basement. They would all be over. Again, this one's interesting. Telluride versus Aspen floor calculations. Ours is actually greater than Aspen's in this example. So what we're finding is even though Aspen's method of calculating makes more sense, it doesn't make a huge difference.
So, sorry for backtracking, but back to our original sort of question, what are we trying to solve? Which is our main primary goal to bring the project scale more to align the project scale with reality, meaning if it really is large, it should be large scale. If it really is, so that we're not getting we're not getting insubstantial scale projects that are big projects. That's a stated goal. Do we have any other stated goals? Are we trying to push?
Not that we've been given, no.
Okay. Because it seems to me like as a HARC member, we're presented sometimes with these hillside lots that are 4 stories. Expressed in that south elevation is 4 stories. We've seen some of them where the step back is minimal to each level. It seems to me like it might be a goal, but if it's not stated, it's not stated. Maybe I shouldn't even state it. But perhaps it could be a goal to help incentivize or to bring additional stepping back up the hillside as a land use code compliance item, instead of us having to scrape at guidelines to achieve that. Does that make sense? But if that's not what we're after, it's not what we're after.
So some of these, the really steep slopes, they're not particularly deep, relatively speaking.
Right.
So you don't have a tremendous amount of ability to step each floor back. And unusable. But then one thing with the 100% on the last example, the 4-story one, the 1,200 or so square feet, you basically eliminate the top floor. And you have 3 stories.
Well, this was the one that we kind of sent back, right? This was on the work session.
Yes.
And that's the one that I feel like during that retreat that kind of freaked everybody out. They saw that and immediately thought we were getting away, letting it get too large. But I mean, I feel like their concern ultimately was mass and scale, not as much as what's going on, underneath, but going back to what he just said of these super tall 4-story structures, which they are unique to the hillside, but I feel like overall that kind of seems what they're trying to do is just reduce that amount.
So that's one of the next approaches. I will present if you want me to just keep going.
Yeah.
So one option is to limit the number of stories. This one we've been talking about is essentially 5 stories. I guess you could count the below grade as 0, but it is 4 stories above grade. This one was approved on Hillside and is actually 5 stories above grade, but it's significantly stepped up and back up the hillside, and it's very much squashed into the hillside. But we could include language in the land use code that just limits the number of stories or how the stories are expressed, or how they mimic the topography of the site.
Yeah. Not sure what it would be, but I think you look at this 2 different sites. This one is not as steep.
Yeah.
This one's very steep. And you're able to push it back significantly at each level, so you don't read it as 4-story wall. Which this one appears to be, even it's got minor setbacks, but it looks like a wall.
The left.
On the left, yeah. I don't know how you differentiate with the grade.
It seems the one on the right's a lot more palatable than the one on the left.
Yeah.
So therefore it would be almost case by case depending on what the site is.
I'd agree with Drew I think there have been some examples we've seen the last couple of years of 4-story projects that have been, in my opinion, sensitively set into the hillside. I think most of those are Stacy and Tommy projects. I think the one
I
we
don't
saw,
work, I don't work on those ones.
well, the one we saw in the work session, I think we all had a shock to its architecture. There's maybe a broader discussion how these steep hillsides don't lend themselves to historic architectural forms. And these types of forms that we're getting are the appropriate response to hillsides. Bigger conversation. So I'm hesitant to limit a certain, to just say you can't go more than 3, because I think some projects can do it well.
Yeah, this one example I made, the right. I don't know what it looks like from the street, but you certainly sense all that stepping back. It wouldn't feel like a wall of building right there at the street.
And I think some of these right, it's also another question of how do you perceive this at the pedestrian scale, walking the street? You don't really see this mass looking up when you're walking.
You wouldn't
front
see
yard. But you'll see it from the gondola or other aspects from town.
Right. And you know, I think if during that retreat, had we submitted 3 different renderings like the one on the right, it probably wouldn't have been near the concern as it is versus the other one that's a lot steeper. Just because it's not as alarming doesn't stand out. I mean, is there anything you can do in the treatment area for it to kind of make it almost like a flow chart of how it works? If however the certain grade is, you know, allows you to either do more or less. Like, for example, like, you know, like the one on the left, if it's super steep, then, you know, you should be able to dig into that double basement, so to speak. But if it's like the one on the right, then maybe not.
John, have you studied the volumetric calculations from the other, can't remember what zone district that is?
HD2.
I'm curious if I don't have a personal experience with the project there, but I'm wondering if that would be another method to look at.
It may be, and that's one that we have listed. I guess I'm not hearing clear consensus on limiting stories. It's more about how it's expressed on the hillside.
I think it's more about, I think certain sites and certain designers can make a 4-story project blend in and be appropriate, and some can't.
Well, in some ways, the project on the left was like a worst case scenario. I don't know if there's a steeper lot. The way there's the cul-de-sac there, and the way that cul-de-sac pushes that lot even further into the hillside, I think there's probably already some existing timber shoring, or it's not hill picker, but it's already sort of shoved back in there. I mean, so that, like, it's not so much about the designer or not, it's about what they're presented with. I mean, they're way below any sort of height limit still, right? 30 parallel slope.
Mhm. All of these are way below the height limit.
So, but for the one on the left, when this comes back to HARC, we can comment that we don't think the mass and scale is appropriate, have them adjust it till we're satisfied. Now, I guess the question is, do we need additional language in the land use code to help us do that or not? Sorry, in the HARC guideline.
I thought we did that well enough. We weren't short on ammunition for that project with guidelines. I mean, I don't remember the number, but it seems like guidelines were flying left and right, as I recall. So I don't know that we need more guidelines. To me, it's more about bringing, like we've talked about, the land use code, bring those two together closer, so that small scale projects are small scale and then large scale. So we're not getting these large insubstantial scale projects.
I would 100% agree with that. I think that's important to whatever way we figure out the calculation. that we are seeing these projects at the appropriate level of review.
And so,
How large they.
so John had demonstrated that 75% gets us closer,
Not much,
not much, but 100%
puts you over.
puts us over. So we're
And there may
slowly
be
in.
the sweet spot in between 75 and 100. I didn't do
Yeah.
any other.
I wonder, could you do the language for like these hillside lots, which are the big ones that we're talking about? Could you say, you need to present the total square footage? And in that case, the total square footage is over a certain amount, then you have to go to full board. No, just so it's not stuck, you're not put in a lower review level. You know what I mean?
Well, 100, absolutely. Like it used to be assumed that your basement square footage would not ever exceed your main level square footage. More or less, right? And then, but the increase area throws that a wrench in that thought process, but here,
But any new construction ends up being a large scale and comes to the board, right?
No.
No,
No, I'm saying minus the hillside, everything.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is so,
we essentially got rid of large scale applications in the historic district for residential projects.
But we still have the 2,500 square foot cutoff. So to Bob's point, you could just, a simplest solution would be, you know, if it's total of 2,500 square feet or more, you know, it needs to be, or greater than that, or greater than whatever, X, 3,000, 4,000, it goes to the full board, whether it's underground, above ground, it doesn't matter.
Well, and I get your point, and I don't disagree that there's a disconnect between the scale and the actual floor area that's being counted. But that wasn't one of the concerns. I mean, that's one of my concerns, but that wasn't one of the concerns expressed at the retreat. I think those concerns had really more to do with the size of these projects that we're seeing,
so then,
mass and scale.
so then the goal is really to reduce square footage.
I mean,
That's a
we
different goal.
we can fix this disconnect between the scales. Yeah. That doesn't, I don't think that solves the bigger concerns. Again, those weren't clear, but that's
I mean,
my.
we're to adjudicate mass and scale. So for us, it's and we already had this 8 years ago where it was carefully thought out for, oh my gosh, Stacy, almost a year. I've got my whole file still, almost a year of the basement, you know, bonus, et cetera. So I just think to undo that in a quick last 30 minutes of one meeting and then ask us to undo it here is, I don't think this board's ready to do that, is what I'm hearing.
Okay. I'm just gonna move through these next possibilities, and these have been discussed, I think, with some of you board members as well as staff. There have been some projects, in addition to this one, I'm showing that had been approved on Tomboy Road. This one has a 40-foot facade width. One we're looking at now has about a 65-foot facade width on a wide lot. Again, we're talking about mass and scale. I'm hearing from you all that maybe that's not your concern. And if that is not your concern, then I can share that with the other boards, but this is another way to approach the mass and scale question.
That is for me, it's a huge concern. When this project came through, we did talk about ways to articulate that 40 feet. And if this is what was approved, that it's an improvement over what they submitted originally. We can quibble over what it is now, and that was, I think, one of our main disagreements with the one we've been talking about on Primrose. It was the sheer width of it. There needs to be some I mean, there needs to be some,
Is it the
corner to
overall width or
corner.
is it the articulation of the width?
well, it's that front to back articulation and also the side to side. I mean, this goes straight up corner, well, not corner to corner, but
Pretty close.
one corner does. There's not, but we talk a lot about stepping down to the street, but perhaps we should talk about stepping down to the side yard property lines as well.
Well, 30 or 40 feet needs some articulation like it is on the east end here, but what's the one at 60 feet? Do we have one? I'm sorry.
I can't talk about it, but it's an example of things that we're seeing.
Yeah, well, I'm struggling. I haven't seen it yet, but 60 feet. If this is 40 and we have just this little articulation on the east end, 60 feet seems like a mass and scale issue to me.
So someone touched on this a moment ago, where in the HD2 zone district, there's a maximum volume, but it's above grade volume. Still, we don't count below grade volume. However, it made us think that maybe there is a maximum total area that includes above grade floor area and below grade area. And perhaps, no more than 50% of that can be expressed above grade, which would kind of balance out the above and below grade floor areas, or we wouldn't get these enormous basements, which seem to be the issue at the moment, but we also wouldn't get the mass and scale issues maybe that we're talking about. I don't know, haven't analyzed it, but this is another approach.
So I think this is the sort of the volumetric. I don't have personal experience with calculating those, but I think that might be a method to look at a little further, like you did with the others. That's an already sort of an existing framework in the land use code. I'm sort of thinking out loud, if we start to limit, these lots are difficult and expensive to build on. If we start limiting how much floor area they can have by going deeper, we're inevitably going to see these projects rise out of the ground more. So while we may be, if deep basements are a problem, we might find a solution that solves that, but then that gives HARC more heartburn of trying to deal with larger projects from the get-go.
And if these, looking up there in the overlook, where we've approved at least 5 or maybe 6, and they had a PUD where it gave up open space, and now they have a suggested change to their volumetric formula. I don't know how that goes.
No, the PUD is set. We can't change their maximum volume.
Okay.
But there may be opportunity to change some of the other dimensional requirements.
Yeah.
And it may be that if we want to look at maximum volume, it may not apply to that zone district because it does have a PUD. We haven't sorted out all the details around the PUD, but I think I'd like to know your take on this approach in general.
So total floor area, I don't know how to look at the impact. Like Matt said, maybe we should look at some examples, but I mean, is it 8,000? I mean, I don't know how, because I'm sympathetic so far to the width. And I think maybe the 75%, but the 100 seems like that's not something that is affecting mass and scale. So I'm not sure I would favor that, but, and then maybe this Aspen model makes some sense. I don't know, but I don't know how to gauge this maximum total area without just going through, I guess, a couple of examples like you did on the previous ones.
Well, it may depend on lot size, like the rest of our dimensional requirements do for floor area. So it may be a ratio of lot size.
Yeah. Mhm.
Seems like a logical.
We
thing.
haven't really analyzed this approach because
We're talking total square footage.
total area above grade and below grade.
Yeah.
And I don't, it could be area, or it could be volume. Volume is a little harder for everyone to calculate.
Sorry,
How's everybody? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just thinking out loud, if we're gonna limit the maximum total. Now we're not distinguishing between below and above grade. Above grade square footage is clearly better space. So there'd be less incentive to keep it underground. Now people are gonna be, instead of maximizing what they don't have to count, is what everybody's doing now, they'll push up against the height limit.
Yeah.
And we're not having a problem with that now.
Yeah, we'll have more massive scale issues with park.
Yeah, this seems like this is going in maybe the wrong direction. Or the consequences will be worse.
Yeah. I think if this is about trying to, I mean, we keep swapping back and forth between concerns about basements and construction mitigation concerns and mass and scale above grade, but if this is about construction concerns and deep basements we shouldn't allow, there seems like there should be some limit on height based off of existing or pre-construction or post-construction grade that a basement has to follow.
Could you say that again, man?
It seems like it should be the basement depth should be somehow tied to a dimension above the pre-construction or post-construction grade.
Oh, like
It's like
a
a
below
reverse
grade
building.
parallel
Yeah.
slope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maximum building depth.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
So it wouldn't be like the line there where it's whatever, 25 feet or something.
Bob, could you speak into your microphone,
Sorry.
please?
So we would be the line.
In this example,
Yeah.
maybe this ring gets cut off,
Yeah.
right? But these sort of cuts are minimized. Take this line that's projected up.
Yeah, so the line, the blue line at the top is what? That's gotta be 30 feet, right? 30-foot parallel slope, maybe. I don't know what number works, but 15 foot. 18 foot, because that's the limit of kind of the established limit of micropile shoring. 18-foot maximum depth. It's an idea I hadn't considered.
Nope, that's new.
Interesting idea. So that line would come down and you'd pretty much have what you have there, maybe a little bit higher, but not much.
Yeah, I don't know how deep the line is, but
It'll be tricky, right? Because roofs are measured typically at points, ridge points. Basements are measured side to side, and if you're great, a lot of our sites, the topography is pretty perpendicular, but what about a site that really gets kind of crazy with the topography? Now that calculation gets kind of nutty.
yeah, I mean, if you're in the computer, you just take the terrain.
Well, no, I
down,
know.
but if you're not, that is tricky.
But you have to put it on paper in a way that people can see it.
So I think that a method like that could help with deeper basements and construction and mitigating the issues with deeper excavations. It doesn't solve mass and scale, and it again, everything that we do that would further restrict the basements is going to naturally push up the above grade space of what people are going to come in for.
But we have the review of mass and scale, no matter what they come in with.
True.
We can
It
say,
just makes it more difficult.
sorry, this doesn't work.
And the point P and Z was trying to make our lives easier. That's what she said. No, it wasn't. PNC.
With the land use code amendments.
Yeah.
Making land use code amendments.
So that it made our job easier.
Well, HARC struggles with mass and
No,
scale.
yeah, I'm afraid what that will look like if we mess with the lower level. I mean, maybe it does have a limit for construction, but when you look at the mass and scale on this, and they're all gonna change, right? Every project's gonna be different, but that's pretty minimal what we're
Really minimal,
seeing there.
yeah.
And this is a great project. It's stepped back in the mass and scale. I mean, we're not seeing more than a story and a half at any point.
Mhm.
And if we take the basement away.
So it seems like I don't hear consensus about limiting this total area above or below ground. Would rather look at maybe the total height basement up and still encourage underground. And I mean, that's what mass and scale is about on the hillside. It's out of sight, out of mind. So it doesn't sound like, it sounds like from this height from the basement up is something we want to consider, I guess, at least. So Johnny, you've gone all through 5 of these. Could you put up number 3, the number of stories, just one last time here, and then maybe we can summarize. So the one on the right, I think, have we approved the one on the right, or is that this?
Yes.
Make believe? Yeah.
No, it's been approved.
Yeah, and back to what Chris says, you don't see multiple stories at once, well, except maybe from the gondola. But are we okay with 5 stories on this model that we approved? We must be okay. And therefore 4 stories of living area with 1 garage. Are we, straw poll, are we all good with this since we approved it weeks ago?
I'm fine with it if this is the project I think it is. Seems like it was sensitive to fit within the landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's huge differences between these 2 projects that aren't apparent in these section views. If the south elevations of these 2 projects, I think, look dramatically different.
Agreed. The one on the left, to me, looks like a massive shovel from excavator came and pulled out the hillside. The project on the right starts to step down and blend into the side yards, the rest of the massing.
So
Well,
I would,
it's kind of not fair too either, because one's an elevation and one's a section.
well, yeah, but I would hope if you, even though it's not a fair, but to demonstrate, it more radically demonstrates the difference between what we sent home packing in just a few minutes versus what we approved. And I think if P&Z saw this on the screen and or the council, they might feel more comfortable that we're doing the right thing with mass and scale based on the topography and the current, other than changing the, I mean, I think I'm kind of hearing a consensus, other than maybe investigating this basement height and maybe looking at taking 50 to 75, but I'm not sure we have consensus for 100 and that's taken away square footage that we have. You know, our main mission would be to get the scale solution, and unless, I don't even know that we could adjudicate or to change land use code to say, or the design guidelines say, and the 4th floor must be back X feet, because it really does depend on the slope. And this is just such a good example. But I'm open to anybody else's comments here. In summary.
Just to clarify, if we're talking about percentages or other ways to judge basements, we're really just talking about these hillside zone districts, and it was not a wholesale change of the definition that's brought through the rest of town, because it seems like Is that
It seems like there will need to be two different,
sort of definite ways to
Definitions.
definitions or ways to
Yeah.
judge basements depending on the zone district or the, or maybe it's just the steepness of the hillside.
right?
What else can we help you with, John, as far as feedback?
Well, I'm getting the sense that everyone's kind of tapped out.
I think this is difficult and I think.
It
if
is
we- If
difficult.
you could give us this packet, we could think about it a little bit more. Maybe we'll come up with some other ideas.
Is the limit number of stories the last one?
Yes.
Well, no, limit, the total, the last one was the maximum total area.
Oh,
Well,
sorry.
I
yeah.
mean, but we're through them all.
Oh, yeah, I just went back to that one, just to clarify, and which you did.
Yeah, these were all of the potential ways to go at an undefined issue that we had come up with so far.
Well, I think, and I think that is the number one thing we have to kind of resolve is we can solve issues when we know what they are. If this one seems a little like there's something bad out there, but we don't know what, let's fix it. Or certain people think it's a different thing, right?
Yes, I think everyone has maybe different opinions about what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any feedback for John beyond the scale solution? So we adjudicated at the right level. For either, number one, the Aspen model, going to 75%, which didn't impact most of, I don't think I heard.
Didn't change any, I think, except one of the
Yeah,
projects I looked at.
but I would be opposed to going to 100 based on what you showed in those brief examples.
I can fine tune it a little bit and see if there's some range between 75 and 100.
That could be useful to look at that. And I still think that there's something with either volumetric calculation or sort of, as Bob was describing, like a total area and a percentage. There might be some sweet spot that you find with that type of calculation.
It does still seem like if there's a sweet spot, then the result would be someone will push that front facade or the exposed facade in far enough to get to that percentage. It seems like that will achieve that goal of, well, the unstated goal of increasing step back up the hillside.
Yeah.
But maybe a more pragmatic way about going that is just articulating stepping back up the hillside. I don't know.
Just do what we can do now.
Right.
But it didn't seem like the 75% was harmful, except maybe minor, a little bit minor in the last example, but between that and just defining this scale solution, which might be a different solution, it incensed what you just described, pushing it back into the hill, and we're mass and scale adjudicators. That's what we want. And I don't know any of the others. Well, other than width, I'm I would like to see some examples of what if based on correlation to the width of the lot and the width of the facade. I think we all share a concern on that 40-footer. And
I'm concerned about, I'm confused about where the width facade came into this. Seems an outlier from the rest of these examples and conversations. Is the facade width just trying to limit overall mass and scale? Doesn't seem to have any correlation with basements.
Well, except for all that basement area is expressing itself.
Why it's underground.
Not when it's not below ground. That's on the hillside. That's why basements are such a flashpoint on the hillside.
I got you.
It's a basement until it's not.
I got you.
yeah, well said.
You gotta do something with that facade. The width of whatever it is,
So
treat that some way. So that.
I think number number 2, number 4, and maybe on number 5, not as stated, but looking at some basement height. John, I'm hearing, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing there's further examples or investigation we'd like to see on 2, 4, and on 5, changing it to maybe the height of the whole basement.
So you're saying the percentage of basement and facade width and total area, you would like to see more analysis?
Well, but I think total area, we gravitated to something new, a 5A or a 5B. The height of the, using the
Yeah.
parallel slope method.
The depth of the basement.
Yeah, not the area. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm listening intently, and I think we gravitated to a 5B.
I think, Bob, could you expand on what you said? I thought you were describing a way to calculate total area, floor area, and then divide it between what's basement and above grade and looking at some kind of ratio. Is that correct?
I think so. I'll think back on it. I was looking at more in terms of the review.
Yeah.
And that discussion. Is there a number that we can use that guarantees these big buildings get put into the full board? You know, anything totally over 2,500 square feet or 4,000 square feet or whatever. Some of these buildings are 8,000 square feet and there's only 1,100 square feet that shows.
I think that's worthy to
So I
look at.
think we need to look at that.
We'll end up seeing our first double elevation, right? I don't mean elevation to building elevation. I mean, staff's gonna elevate it to chair and chair's gonna say, I'm gonna elevate it to the full board.
Yeah.
We'd like to
But
avoid
if we
that.
have a
All new
minimum.
Construction. Is at the board level.
Say it again.
All new construction is at the board level.
Could you please speak into the
Oh, sorry.
microphone for the recording?
Yes.
Thank you.
Project. All new construction goes to the board level.
Well, we just undid that. We just went the opposite direction though.
Yeah.
We recategorized things so that they would
Yeah.
go to the chair and go to staff. Because we were experiencing 12-month wait times or 16 or 18 or whatever it was.
We would have to meet 2 or 3 times a month if we did all new construction.
No, I think we can fix this.
I think.
I don't think we're in the
this
same
discussion-
rush we were either. I always go back and forth.
I think that we're talking about the hillside area where these houses are gigantic. But there's so little of it that shows. Technically, they could be done by staff or by the chair, and I think they need to come to forward. It's a way to do that is total square footage, some number in there that say anything above this on the hillside has to go to the full board.
I agree. I think there's some.
Currently
there's
have
some
the right to
metric.
raise any project.
Yes. We can definitely look at that.
I don't know what the answer is, but I think that idea somehow could be put into place. Just, don't even think about it.
and-
It's gonna go to the board.
In a sense, we did just undo that. We just lowered the review scale of most of our projects for a reason. I think I don't think the problem is even with the level of review. It's that there's such a disconnect between the MAC or the total floor area and the above grade floor area. I think there's no logical correlation right now. None of us so far has been able to figure out what that is. But that is kind of a side thing, that's been highlighted through this exercise. I don't think that, we just went through a land use code to decrease the level of review of most of these projects outside the historic district intentionally. So I really don't want to go back and just undo that, what we just did intentionally. I don't think there's been any concern about the chair level reviews. You know, or those projects going to the chair, but I think the essence of it is that, you know, enormous projects are being represented as very small projects.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think those need to come to the full board.
So I think in summary, John, 2, 4, and 5B, and amongst those, a scale solution to not having 6,000 square foot house being reviewed at maybe even the chair level, let alone staff. I mean, I think there's consensus for that, and I think the rest of those doesn't seem like the board believes they're adding any value.
Okay.
And if I just too, I think because we're specifically talking about the hillside area, I think that change that we're talking about to make sure it goes to the board would be possible. I know you went through a lot of stuff for all the rest of town, but since we're specifically talking about that, that's one thing that we could do. I think is part of it. Council. Well, about it. I don't.
Mark, there are a few people here in Rebecca Hall and maybe even on Zoom who've been listening. I don't know if they want to say anything, but
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of it's not a public hearing, but if you'd like to hear from them, you might.
Well, I'd love to hear any final comments if anybody. I only see 1 or 2 people online. Well, 1 person. But I don't know who's in the room, but please just open up the floor for comments, whoever's there.
Peter Sante.
Oh, good.
Peter Sante. No particular order. I think in the HR and more in the kind of the flatter part of town, I've never worked on a flat lot, and they kind of don't exist here. There's various degrees of slope. We're talking about. I think it's easy to say two-story basements, and a lot of the graphics show kind of examples of that. But I think there's plenty of examples where you're going to end up with a sidewalk entry, a garage a level below, and not be able to do a basement below your sort of garage, your alley lower level. And that might be fine, but I think that's what the, you know, any small portion of a basement under an entry level is gonna sort of take a level below whatever your lowest access is. For better or worse, I think that's gonna happen all over, not just too deep, like 20 feet down in a hole. So I think about not, you know, if you're limiting through some vertical dimension, doing so from a grade that makes sense so that you're not creating limits that aren't maybe intended. I think soil nailing on a lot of these hillside lots, there's an efficiency. It's changing subjects, doing rather tall back walls, and you can go, as you were describing, Stacy, kind of laterally to shore 40+ feet, right?
Sometimes you can't, sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
there's a Mountain Avenue right away there.
So I am a fan at a glance of the idea of the Aspen method, or in that what projects above ground counts. I think that makes a lot of sense because it fundamentally ties in with how the rest of town and how HARC operates. So it makes a lot of sense. I don't know that skewing percentages is going to do anything other than create another exercise to try to get around. As a designer, there's no end to how you can manipulate a definition in order to get it to meet, go into the category you can exercise, which is whether you're trying to increase basement or you're trying to skew it otherwise. So creating hard percentages are just opportunities to manipulate it to an outcome. So I don't think that's probably gonna be helpful at a glance. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Dylan Henderson, I've done a couple of these, both in design and a couple in schematic, right? And so what we found So a couple of things. So the parallel offset below grade, the problem I see with that is depending on the slope of the lot, you're either going to have a functional or non-functional basement because the depth of that basement to be a legal garage has to be somewhere in that 22 to 24 foot depth. And so depending on how steep that slope is going to drive whether or not you can get that basement to work or some of those spaces to work. So I think that's a little problematic. Limiting it based on a micropile depth, they're going to invent a better micropile. So that's hard, right? So today is 18, tomorrow's 22, next year's 25. And so they'll say, well, we can go deeper, right? So I think that's a little hard because you're limiting it on a technology. And so I think that concern, what is difficult with these lots that we found is that you have this percentage or volume above grade, you have the parallel offset, and then you have your site coverage. That's currently what's driving this, right? If now what we start to do is say, we're now going to calculate a ratio of percentage of floor area as counted, right? And so I'm sort of backing up what Peter said, because I like the idea of the way that Aspen is doing it, where they count all of the above grade square footages. There has to be a bit of a simplification for, I think, both the applicant and staff to look at this and say, this is something that's easily compliant, because on some of these lots that we do have that cross slope that Stacy was talking about. So you'll have the majority of your square footage on your east side is out of grade, and that's what's being counted. Everything on the west side is down below grade. And so that's why you end up with these stacking houses that go straight up the western property line, because there's no way to step that house down to property line without creating a really awkward stagger, because otherwise you're retaining the whole way down. So it's almost like the top volume has to be the furthest to the west, and then everything has to stack back east. And visually, architecturally, having tried that, it looks pretty funny. And so there's this, it's a really difficult problem. I think it's going to be a hard one to figure out, but I would agree with Peter that the total area above grade is a great way to go. I think the total percentage of volume above grade, that 30,000 cubic feet, that's a hard one on a cross slope. Works really well when you've just got total square footage above grade and it's total parallel topo. Very hard when it's a cross slope. And so, you know, I would hope that we don't then add a ratio percentage on top of that to make it even more difficult to figure out what's allowed. So that's all I have.
So Dylan, you think that the Aspen model versus going from 50 to 75, which didn't, well, it's not going to completely solve our scale problem anyway, as far as who adjudicates it at what level, but you think that would be preferable, even though the 75% didn't, well, it doesn't solve the scale problem, but it doesn't, it in sense pushing back into the hill, which trying to reduce mass and scale. So you think the Aspen model makes more sense?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think HARC does a really good job dealing with mass and scale. So that stepping back and following natural topography, that sort of is its own dictation, right? We all understand that's what we have to do. The Aspen model just counts total square footage above grade. If you go to this 80% or 90% and you try to hit this sweet spot, that's going to change depending on whether that topography runs in a cross slope or whether it runs parallel to your property line. Right. So in some cases, it's going to move the needle, and in some cases, it's really not. And so I don't see that as being the thing that's going to help you regulate the size of these projects personally. Is the percentage, because I don't think that's really what the issue is. I don't think it's the percentage above grade, right? I think it has a lot more to do with how the perceived stepping of the facade of these buildings, and then how far they step back topographically with the site. That seems to be what the big issue is whenever I've come up against this, as opposed to the cubic volume above grade. Some of these projects are really big and they're only showing 11,000 cubic feet above grade, 18,000 cubic feet. They're way below, right? But they're still big projects. So I'm not sure the cubic volume is driving what you want. And I'm not sure the percentage above or below grade is doing it. I think it's that total square footage above grade that's the Aspen model uses that seems I would agree with Peter. I think that's going to be what moves the needle for you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Did that,
Those,
go ahead.
that's all we have here.
Did that sway, those two comments sway anybody's thinking to forget changing number 2 and having Jonna go to the trouble of doing more exercises and contemplate doing a what if on number 1, the Aspen model? Did that sway anybody?
I still think there might be something to look at with volumetric because we already use it in the land use code. But we both heard that 2 architects like the Aspen model. When I first saw it, it seemed more equitable to go that way, but it seems like it's not quite getting you there with the square footage. So maybe there's another trigger point that kind of Bob was suggesting.
We haven't
Yes.
analyzed all the projects. We analyzed maybe like
This is-
a handful.
This is tough.
It is tough.
This is tough.
Well,
I'm
think-
thinking volunteers.
we-
We would like to
we-
help analyze projects.
Well, you did a great job of coming up with 5 approaches here, but I'm thinking that we could look at this separately. We can look at, figuring out the scale solution, like maybe something that Bob selected, whether it's above or below ground, X square foot. And maybe we should look at a what if at number 1, because right now I thought we were suggesting number 2, something between 70, or just to see if it's not 75, is it something else? But does the board feel that we should look at, if it's not 75, something else, plus look at this volumetric idea from the Aspen model also, or discard number 1?
Mark, at the risk of sounding like I'm re-summarizing a summary, I don't think the Aspen model makes a lot of sense from sort of a logic perspective. It makes sense to count what you see, but it's not getting us to the goal necessarily any faster than fiddling around with percentages. I don't think either of those methods, unless I'm wrong, are moving the needle enough towards our goal. That's why I think we spent more time on, I don't have these memorized by number the way you do, but 3 and 4 perhaps.
I mean, just to kind of like
There you go.
re-summarize like what Stacy's summary. The numbers that we found based on the Aspen model don't vary from the Telluride calculations more than 200 square feet in any direction, plus or minus, which doesn't make logical sense. And like I said, I haven't analyzed all of the projects, but on those projects I analyzed, none of them changed significantly. Same with the percentage of area below grade considered a basement, nothing changed at 75%. Things changed significantly at 100%. So there, I don't think looking to change it to 75% is going to make any difference in 90% of the projects.
Mhm.
But we can dig into it further if you would like to see more examples or greater survey. But I guess, I feel like you all have a better sense of the unintended consequences than I do of some of these changes.
I think all these things we're gonna see projects with more mass and scale above ground, everything we're talking about.
That's an unintended consequence.
Yeah.
But we can deal with that with our review of mass and scale
We can.
and setbacks and that.
So do we want to look at any other examples of the
We're
aspen
already
model then?
doing,
It's already done.
we're already doing it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we don't need anything other than adjust the scale and maybe look at the width as a function of the lot width. I don't know.
I think the one difference between the Telluride and the Aspen model that I like about the Aspen model is you understand exactly what is exposed in terms of the square foot. You see that. And you don't have to go crazy, go calculating it all different ways. I think changing that would just help us understand what's being proposed.
I agree with that. It seems to be balance all areas of town more. What are you seeing of the map?
It's 3,000 building. Okay. That's what's exposed and that's allowed or whatever numbers are.
So what if we do an iteration between the 75 and 100 somewhere, and as John volunteered, and then do we want to look at some other examples of the Aspen model? Well, I mean, she showed it to us. It doesn't even make more than 200 square feet difference. So
No, I think I'm sorry, what it does is gives us a better understanding when they say, oh, it's zero, there's 0 square feet.
yeah,
House. Where the Aspen model, it's, 200, 300, 500, 2,000 square feet. We can understand what we see. That's all I'm saying.
I think there's a lot of logic to that.
okay. So we may still consider that. Okay.
Okay, so I'm hearing 1, 2,
Yeah.
4, and 5B.
Well, this 5B, I kind of got swayed here on basements becoming unusable with that parallel slope measuring that height. I don't know, maybe the architects on the board, Chris, Stacy, want to comment on that?
So-
Yeah.
I had a kind of question for Dylan. That was Dylan's comment. So I understand what you're talking about, a basement, usable garage is going to end up being 22, 24 feet deep. But if you keep pushing down that parallel plane, if you sort of plan it out for that sort of worst case condition, then that could help some deeper basements where we might not have situations of 3 or 4 stacked on top of each other. I think that still could help as long as we don't make sure we don't box out that circumstance. That makes sense to you?
We will dig a little deeper into this. If you all have any ideas or thoughts in the meantime, please share them with me. We can meet, you can email them to me, whatever, but this is kind of an ongoing project, so. But thank you very much for your feedback.
Well, thank you for throwing out the 5 different approaches and stimulating our thinking. So we'll
Yeah,
see where we
it's
get to.
complicated.
Yeah.
Can you send us your presentation?
Sure, I'm happy to send it to
Any other comments or business before we adjourn? Okay, we will adjourn at 9:07 p.m. and thank you all for staying with it tonight. See you in June.
Obviously.